And we should be good to go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. This week we're talking to Foundring. He is someone that I've been following for a while. He has tons of excellent posts about the JFK conspiracy and some things that people don't talk about a lot on there. I've seen him discuss things with like the vaccines and the medical industry as well. But I think the biggest thing that I know you from is the songs and the music that you do. And wanted to thank you for your time here and for coming on the show and everything like that. Real quick, is there anything you'd like to share about yourself?
No, I mean, I appreciate being here and talking with you. And I want to just throw that right back at you in terms of some of the deep dives that I've seen you do. And there's one thing to do the sort of the wham bam, thank you, ma'am, kind of social media approach, but then it's really important to then also get into the nitty gritty. And it's important to do them both, to be honest. Um, but anyway, it's an honor to be here talking with you. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I have a couple questions for you. We may have stuff come through the chat as well. And I'll kind of keep an eye on that as it comes through. But I guess to start out, how long have you been awake, I guess, and what sort of like started you down this path?
I just don't feel like I'm there yet. Still, I feel like I'm still wiping the sleep out of my eyes, bro.
Yeah.
Like every day, there's new things. I don't know. I feel like I have always been naturally skeptical. I mean, I'm an artist type personality, whatever the heck that means.
Yeah.
And I kind of was taking the different route musically from a really young age. And I mean, I was kind of into classical. And I was into classical, but then I wasn't really into jazz. I kind of felt like I wanted to learn pop songs and Radiohead and stuff like that. And I didn't really know what to do. And I went to conservatory and I got disillusioned. And this is in the Bush years, kind of was when I came to my own political awareness.
Mm.
And I was not necessarily like Democrats, yay, but I was like, what is going on with these Iraq war? And then the guy who I was named after, my neighbor, was killed in action in Iraq,
Oh,
one of the
wow.
first army reservists to die over there. And it was shocking to me. I was like, wait a second, I learned in school in the 90s how kind of dumb the Vietnam War was. I mean, already I was learning about all that. And then the fact that I mean, the way that I saw it from my education in the 90s was like we were coasting off of this post World War II sort of American exceptionalism and this idea of this world's policeman and all that. And that we kind of had distanced ourselves from that, right? And that was just the 90s were kind of awesome. I know a lot of people are get nostalgic for that, but that's when I grew up,
Mhm.
and everything was pretty awesome. And racial stuff wasn't real. I mean, there were the LA riots and OJ Simpson. For the most part, it wasn't like there wasn't the cancel culture, and the internet was actually awesome and based. And that's how a lot of us cut our teeth, right, in the early days on anonymous forums. And it wasn't really until 9/11 that I think I was like, oh, wait, this is, I mean, I was 15, but I was old enough to think for myself.
Mhm.
But not old enough to have been indoctrinated. I was kind of at the perfect age when
Yeah.
9/11 happened. And I had no reason to not I had no reason to doubt the official story, but the official story was so ludicrous that it kind of just turned me into it was like a conspiracy theorist conversion, essentially, episode. And it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like I woke up the next day and being like, oh my God, like Al Qaeda is a government invention, whatever. But it was a process, and it happened to a lot of people through that
Yeah.
time, a lot of people that I knew. And so just to sort of wrap it up, I finally got exposed to Bill Cooper. I started listening to
Mhm.
the radio programs from William Cooper, and learning about sort of the occult side of history. I got into his program, The Hour of the Time, which talks about all this uh, the going back to the Templars, going back to the assassins, the hashish assassin, and all these different these secret societies, and how they have converged and had problems with each other, right, over the years, and how this influences a lot of world history. And so I kind of been like, oh, I'm peeling these layers. And as a guy who's kind of looking for all the different layers and music and stuff, it was only natural that I'm like, oh, layers of conspiracies and history. So
Yeah.
started going through the Alex Jones phase. I was pretty much fully kind of Screw the Man by Ron Paul. Ron Paul, his 2008 campaign, his first one, right after the Bush era. And I was like, screw Republicans, screw Democrats. This new guy is like, audit the Fed and
Yeah.
all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this history of finance and all that stuff. So I started doing that and getting into that. And then Obama obviously won. And then I kind of just I mostly did anonymous online posting, and I created a musical persona, but I didn't want that to be really associated with the conspiracy side because I wanted to just to have the music. I wanted to be separate from that,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. And I was more interested in these traditional American musical styles, and I didn't really want to pollute my interest in that with any of this other stuff because I wanted to make what I was doing appealing to the normies.
Mhm.
And I did that for many years on YouTube, 15, 16 years. But they really were messing with my channel in a big way. And then when COVID hit, I kind of just went nuclear, at least on their asses. And I just said, screw this, I'm done. I mean, I lost all my jobs for all the various reasons.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I'm just going to start writing songs because I didn't really see a lot of people, not that there weren't people resisting it, but musically it really wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
So there was almost like there was this vacuum and I couldn't get work IRL. So I was like, I might as well just sing about how ridiculous this stuff is.
Yeah.
And people really they enjoyed it. And it was a way for them, which is traditionally in history, is that you have your outlets through art and
Mhm.
comedy and things like that, right? So you can, going back thousands of years, you go to the local play, or hear the bard singing, and it would be vulgar,
Mhm.
funny, and it would sing about things that you couldn't necessarily do, like, you know, overthrowing the king. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like rebellious stuff, like stuff that was taboo. And the kings and the power structures, they actually kind of like that because the jester provides this sort of pressure valve for the
Mhm.
masses. Because here there's the jester making fun of the king's face to his face,
Yeah.
and he doesn't get his head caught off for it. And so the audience, the unwashed masses have their laugh, and the king kind of like, and they're not going to boil over with the thing.
Yeah.
So during COVID, what we saw was them cut the head off of the jester or cut the tongue off the jester, and that pressure valve went away, and the people lost this way to unwind that we've traditionally had, going to church, even going to these places where you can meet together and shoot the shit, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
right? And so I feel like what I was doing, what other people were doing, through, since we couldn't really talk about this stuff, we were approaching it through satire and parody and music and art and comedy. And it worked until a certain point, but then they came for us too.
Yeah.
So they came for me, and my channel of like forever, they removed without explanation, and they're still denying my appeals. But it was like we flew too close to the sun, a lot of us. And it is what it is. We all have to walk that delicate balance. And honestly, what they've done is they've created a sense of almost like an artistic renaissance. I've seen this happen, where if they hadn't been pushing so hard, I wouldn't be here talking with you, right? I would
Yeah.
have just kind of kept doing my normie stuff, and instead they pushed us too far.
Yeah.
And then so here we are, and then now we are just making our own ways when we could have participated in society, but they didn't really want to provide us that courtesy. So there's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I think that there's like certain parallels between ours. I think 9/11 was probably my first big like, wait, what's going on? I feel like things aren't adding up, like, moment in my life. And then finding out about like the Federal Reserve and all the institutional banking cartels and things like that. Um, and then COVID, I think, sort of worked to, like you said, sort of reinvigorate, what was maybe like complacence from a lot of people to just, I'm not going along with this. I'm not doing the mandates or the masks or what that looks like. So I think you're right in that they sort of overplayed their hand a lot, with the COVID, like the quarantines and shutting things down and basically separating people from like their support systems. It was rough, and seeing like all big tech like sort of collude together on the same things, even though they're supposed to be like in competition with each other, or it's supposed to be a free market, that they were sort of doing a lot of the like governance and regulation and stuff, so the actual government could say, look, it's not us, you know. um awesome stuff, man. So how long have you been doing music? Like what got you started there?
Well, forever. I have musical family. I mean, something drew me to it initially. The piano kind of was the thing. Pulled me to it like 4, 5 years old. My big sister played. I kind of wanted to be like her, and she kind of got mad because I was starting to try to learn her music. But she was really good at art, at like drawing stuff, and so music was kind of my thing. So she's like screw this. So she's like, I'm just gonna do art, and then I'm like, fine, I'll do piano. And so I ran with it, and I played violin from a young age, and was in a lot of orchestras and small ensembles, and that was really great. It was just great, that sense of the tradition, and we can talk a little bit more as we go here, just about the importance of these traditions, that cultural traditions that we need to maintain. And you know, we have our own here in America, but this sort of Western, uh, for lack of a better term, classical musical tradition is fundamental to modern civilization, as far as I'm concerned. They're intrinsically linked with each other,
Hmm.
and keeping these traditions alive is really important. And you kind of feel that importance in a way that can, when you are exposed to it, like a lot of things, when you're learning a new language, it just helps. Not saying you can't learn these things when you're older, but when you're exposed to them at a young age, it becomes like part of your fiber in a big way,
Yeah.
which is why we see in a lot of traditions, other than our own, like in India, like they're great. They have their own great musical tradition, but those kids are freaking like 4 years old. They're playing their ragas from 10 to 10, right? They're
Oh
like, it's
wow.
all day. Like they devote their entire childhoods to this pursuit, right? And I don't know, they're like certain, you can go a little too far with that, but certainly exposing young kids to this type of our cultural heritage is huge. It's really huge. And it really became a part of me. And I was very much classical oriented. I very much, you know, not like when people hear, oh, classical, they think really, you know, dinky, but really classical music is just like if you say, oh, all rock music sounds exactly the same. It's just
Yeah.
it's ludicrous, right? We're talking 500 years of all sorts of different rises and falls and developments and like cultural identities. And you have the Italian stuff and the German stuff and the Russian stuff and the Norwegian stuff and the Finnish, like it's all taps into these different rich cultural heritages that you can experience as almost like a time machine, right? And
Yeah.
that's what a lot of these artists provide. When you revive their music, is like it exists on a page, yeah, but really when you play it and you perform it, you are it's like they're speaking to you from this distance. And music could do that in ways that even things like books and even plays can't really do, because here you can actually take something into your own home, and just experience it in the privacy of your home, or you can see it performed on a live stage, and it's a temporal thing. Like it exists in this nether space, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think I sensed that from a young age. And you know, I deviated. I started when a teenager. I started listening to rock and all sorts of different stuff and punk and all fun things. But there was always that strong connection to this symphonic, orchestral, operatic, whatever it was, musical. Like I started, one of the best gigs I got from a young age was playing for a lot of these musicals. And I'm not like that big. You know, I have a lot of training, and people assume that I was like a theater kid. I was never the theater kid. I thought those kids were kind of dumb.
Yeah.
You know, I was big on soccer, so I was kind of like the soccer star, right? Star,
Okay.
and so that was never really. I mean, music was kind of like, yeah, I'll be a professional soccer player, and then I'll also maybe compose music for movies or something. But then when I was like 15, 16, I was like, you know what? I probably should just stick with the music thing. Yeah, I think that having that classical training was really foundation was really important, and I learned to read music really well, which at the detriment perhaps of learning by ear, separate. discipline, all good, well-rounded musicians should be able to do both. But just in terms of being able to play music uh, on site, I got very good at that. So I
Yeah.
started working with a lot of musicals, and where I would just come in, or choirs, operas. So I could come in and they put the music in front of me, and I could usually just play it. I got good at that, right? Faking it basically till you make
Yeah.
it. And that sort of pattern recognition ability to look at all the black and whites and filter between the notes that shouldn't fit and the ones that do. I feel like I translate that well to when I'm looking at conspiracies
Yeah.
and occult mumbo jumbo and all these things where there's a lot of good info out there, but there's also a lot of nonsense. And we certainly ultimately we don't really know at the end of the day, but we have to do our best
Yeah.
to filter. And I feel like my musical filter really worked well in the realm of conspiracy filters. And I do see that there is an overlap with artistic and creative types in the conspiracy realm, but it is surprising to me that there aren't more, at least well-known musicians that are not doing and talking about this kind of stuff. I don't, maybe they are keeping it more private. Maybe part of the deal of becoming famous is that you have to toe the line.
Yeah.
So I had the benefit of never really kind of making it, though I was like lucky to tour around the world a few times and do some levels of success. That I shouldn't say like I shouldn't be complaining, but I'm sort of outside the beaten path, outside the beaten path,
Yeah.
and it is a liberating thing where I then can't really get canceled anymore.
Yeah.
So then I can just do what I want to do. So that's where we are here.
Awesome. Yeah. It sounds like, from a young age, you knew what you wanted to do. You just hadn't decided if it was all you wanted to do, and you ended up branching out into other things. And
Well, I
that.
love the idea of soundtrack composing. I
Mhm.
like, composers like John Williams. But then I also, I mean, I'll never forget when South Park came out,
Mhm.
right? When I was in seventh grade, and there were some songs in the early episodes that I was like, oh my God. Well, first of all, this idea of this body type of humor, but repackaged in a quirky, almost innocuous way. When you look at, oh, it's just like a cartoon,
Yeah.
that thing, I mean, it was a huge deal at the time, and being a kid, and everyone, all the parents were all freaking out about South. I mean, I remember they were freaking out about The Simpsons too,
Yeah.
right? But when South Park came out, they were really freaking out, right? And of course, as in seventh grade, I'm like getting with all my friends, and we're all like staying after school, and we're like putting it up on the new laptop that my buddy just got, and
Yep.
we're all like, oh, let's watch South Park. But it was this type of irreverent humor. We were listening to, heck, even the Adam Sandler albums. I
Yeah.
don't know if you ever listened to those. They were really, vulgar and inappropriate, but like
Fun.
PG, like
Yeah.
6, 15, maybe even 14, right? Like for a 12-year-old, it was just the coolest thing ever, listen to this stuff. That type of offensive humor really informed me, from a young age. And I heard these South Park songs. I'm like, oh, this idea of satire but put with this lovely melodies. Provides almost this discombobulating effect on the listener, where you get lulled into this almost false sense of security, and then all of a sudden you're getting hit with all these offensive racial
Yeah.
terms or whatever. And it speaks to the power of music and how it is actually wielded against us in opposite ways today in terms of pop music, where you get sort of lulled into these beats are all the same rhythms, and these chord structures are all the same, and sure, the melody might be a little bit different here and there, and the sound is a little different, but really it's just recycling the same to get you to a lower frequency. And then it makes you more, you lose a lot of your personal agency, and it makes you more sort of that drone like state and more susceptible to advertising and propaganda. In other words, it's a formula, right? And they will also, people often wax eloquent about, oh, they put magic spells in music, right? Oh, there's a
Mhm.
satanic messaging here, and sometimes I'm like, okay, well, now you're just going a little too far, playing this backwards and forward, like all that.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, there's truth to it, whereas these these lyricists come up with these combinations of words that are almost have this spell like effect, and combined with music it just gets, it's like an exponential spell effect.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the popular music today is like that, where it if people like me take these pop themes and catchy ideas and stuff, but then repackage it with subversive content, it is like taking their tools and using it against them essentially.
Yeah.
And that really pisses them off. That really pisses them off, which is why artists that step outside the norm, they get crucified, right? Because it isn't necessarily for things that they might have done in the past. It's for the potential that if enough artists can make it and do subversive type content, I'm not talking like really subversive, just stuff that makes you think a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Those are, if the more that you let those artists proliferate, the more that there's going to be copycats, right? So you have to nip it in the bud, right? And so they come for these people before they make it, right? So my YouTube channel, it was like, it was really starting to blow up, but it was only like 20, 30,000 subscribers. But it was the fact that I had been suppressed for so long, and finally I was breaking through.
Yeah.
It was the potential of where I would be now, 3, 4, 5 years later, if they hadn't cut it when they did, right?
Yeah.
So they come for you before you really have a chance. They have, and I don't know if it's a bunch of humans in a room, or if it's like the algorithm, it's like these AI type things that they've been using for far longer than they admit, to sort of find who are the outliers, who are like, in the early days of YouTube, I was doing mostly classical ragtime piano, but every once in a while I would slip in a song anti-war.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be like outrageous in your face, like they're killing us, blah blah blah. It would be more subtle, right?
Yeah.
But it was probably enough to have me flagged. And I think that's what the big tech did in the early days of social media, and when YouTube first came on the scene, was they sort of used something to flag people and then to sort of shadow ban them in
Yeah.
perpetuity. And this was happening way longer than people realize. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, my next question was going to be about the like the 4/4 timing that they use. I think we've actually talked back and forth in comments before about that Axis of Awesome song.
Right.
Yeah, the 4 chord song.
Four chord song.
Yeah. So what do you think specifically they're doing to us with these things? Like, I know you said that they sort of take us into like a lower vibration or a lower frequency. Could you sort of elaborate on that a little bit?
It's a tough thing because I'm still navigating a lot of these ideas, and I get, sometimes I get pushback because I'll mention, oh, I think this chord sequence is bad, and then someone will say, oh, I wrote a song with that chord sequence, and am I a bad person? You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Like, a lot of this is intent. A lot of this is intent, is coming from where you're coming from, right? And it gets, you lose a lot of people when you start getting into the weeds of the theory, the musical theory, because a lot of people are like, well, I don't know anything about scales and C major, and then people just turn off, right? So it's hard to package this stuff to reach the musicians and the normies. I'm not, well, not normies, that's a bad term. The people that aren't necessarily musically educated,
Yeah.
and concepts that they can relate to and grasp onto. And I think a lot of what we are seeing is just the oversimplification of everything, in terms of, not that these songs are inherently easy, and it's just that the experience artistically of them is, there's no challenge there, right? So you are not, as the person who, the creating of art, except now that we're in the AI realm when you can just
Yeah.
press a button, but generally the creation of art, it involves a little bit of effort. It involves effort on the part of an artist, and you have to do something. I mean, you have to come up with something. Even if you're copying something, you need to, you're going to get sued unless you give some sort of unique thing there. So there, it draws something out of you, right?
Hmm.
But if your product then doesn't stimulate, it becomes a dead end of a, right? you wasted something, and then you're not going to get any type of reaction from that in a way that is reciprocal, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So I think what a lot of this music today is, there's no reciprocality there, in that they're pumping out all this stuff, which is why it's becoming so automated too, because they don't want to give up their creative juju, their creative
Hmm.
juices, without any type of honest, sincere. An artist cannot exist in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
You can have a stories of lone geniuses that are creating works by themselves, but that doesn't really happen. Like, you have people like Chopin, who is one of the greatest romantic era composers for piano.
Yeah.
And yes, he would lock himself up in a room and work on his masterpieces for a while, but he needed feedback, right? He needed to go out and hand it to his friend Liszt and be like, please play this for me so I know it's good, right?
Yeah.
Like, there needs to be some sort of vindication, or this completion that the artist has. And if you're just creating generic slop, you're not going to. And look, there's a time and place for that, right? And we sort of saw that historically in the classical era, where, and again, I don't want to make this a music history lesson, but if you think of Baroque
Hmm.
as this, people think of it as a Baroque architecture, but really the Baroque era was Bach's time, right? People know Bach, Johann
Yeah.
Sebastian Bach. People also know Vivaldi, right? They're familiar with Vivaldi's Four Seasons, and all this stuff was actually very dynamic and very exciting, and it had a lot of range of emotions, a lot of lights and darks, majors and minors, keys in between stuff. And it was really this stimulating time. And it sort of, and this is in the 1700s mostly, right? And of course, we had great polyphonic music for hundreds of years before that. But what we saw in the classical era, which is more like Mozart's time, not to harp on Mozart, but this is more like the late 1700s, early 1800s, right around the French Revolution and American Revolution, when things really bubbled over. But really, what we saw there was there was a status quo, and a lot of the music became very about just sort of, oh, we're having our fancy party, we're going to put on our white wigs, and I mean, that's just a stereotype
Yeah.
of that time for a reason, and generally was pretty boring. And a lot of the music, like Haydn, I don't know, maybe we have some Haydn fans out there, and I'll be insulting them, but a lot of that stuff is just very generic, and it just sounds the same for me, and I cannot stand it. And people say, oh, I don't like classical music. Well, you probably have heard a lot of this era of just, it's really just sounds, it's because it's meant to sound the same. It's not really meant to stimulate. It's meant to sort of just be background fancy stuff.
Yeah.
Well, then we saw this turn around in the romantic era, really in towards the mid 1800s. And this was happening in Europe. This was also happening in America too, where we had our own sort of musical revolution, and it became more of this novelty. The novelty came back. Is everything like in cycle? It's like it's in cycles, right? Everything is
Hmm.
these ups and downs. So we had this up in Baroque time, and then it went down during the classical era. Then it went up again in the romantic, and things were really bustling. And then we hit contemporary era, which is, the 1900s. And then it really honestly went in the other direction, at least in terms, not that people aren't making great, brilliant, innovative music, but just in terms of what became the standard, acceptable, most popular music of the day. Pop music became very, very generic.
Yeah.
And to sort of tie it into the question about the infamous four chords, is a lot of the music, like I said, of the classical era, specifically the small window during Mozart's time. And Mozart was an outlier. He wrote a lot of this very generic stuff, but he really wrote a lot of very emotive, very stimulating and exciting and challenging music. And I think a lot of when I talk about these concepts,
Hmm.
a, a term that always seems to come back is the hero's journey for me.
Okay.
The
Yep.
hero's journey. And I'm sure you know what I mean by the hero's journey.
Yeah. The story circle.
The story, yeah, this
Yeah.
this growth that of go back to Homer, right? The
Yeah.
Odyssey and the Iliad. And what we have are these larger than life characters that are also very human, right? You learn about the foibles that they have. You learn about Odysseus and his hubris. We
Yeah.
learn about Hercules, but he also has his strong moments of weaknesses, even as the strongest man in the world, right?
Yeah.
So these are characters that are iconic, that are eternal, that touch on eternal themes of man's growth and his birth and his development and his death. And it's these journeys that we all go on, and these great epic stories and histories, and eventually the music, the operas, and all these things do this. They show the rise and fall, the lows and the highs. And it's not always just a duality yin yang. There's all the stuff in between and everything, right? But it's the different colors of the human experience. And it's not always easy to experience. You cry, you laugh, you are angry, you're offended in life.
Yeah.
And it should make sense that good art will capture this. And when you went to see Shakespeare, who wasn't really Shakespeare, it was probably, it was probably some other people, but that's a different conversation. But still, you were given these experiences. Even going back to Roman, even Greek plays, this was intense, real life stuff. And the audience came away. And of course, this got taken and turned into the Roman spectacle of the gladiator, the killing, right? That we lost something there, and that was tied into the decadence. And then the fall of that civilization was because they stepped away from the more, it ended up being all just death, kill, 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 or sex, 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 right? It was become all the vulgar traits were put in the front. And that's what we saw with the degradation of American music, like ragtime turned into jazz, turned into highly sexualized popular rock, well, rock and roll, and then popular music today. All these things that were more subtle, these themes were just right in your face from the very beginning. And that shock value was actually ended up replacing the artistic value. Anyway, so this idea of this hero's journey, you can hear it in Beethoven's music. You can hear it in Wagner's music. And there are moments that will unsettle you, and that you're kind of like, oh, I don't know how I feel. And that's like what a good movie soundtrack does, right? And of course, all the great movie composers, they literally have lifted everything from the classical composers. It's just really, John Williams, honestly, love him. He basically didn't come up with one original music idea. Okay, maybe I'm being a bit harsh, but for the most part, they're just lifting from the Puccinis, the Rossinis, the Wagners, all these great composers from the past, right? Which are still a very important part of a lot of cultural heritage today. And ones that they're again trying to erase. They're trying to be like, oh yeah, all this great music, and we came up with that like 20, 30 years ago. I'm like, no. Nothing new under the sun. Sure, we repackage it with a modern sheen, but humans have been come up with this stuff for a really long time. And it's important to keep creating new stuff, but it's also important to keep the old stuff alive, which is what it's like basically my mission, right?
Yeah.
So this idea of the hero's journey has been replaced almost in our own lifetime, because one example I like to mention, funnily enough, is the movie Mulan. The movie Mulan, which is a Disney movie, right?
Yeah.
And it's an old story going back to Japanese times, or is it Chinese? I don't even know. Whatever. China. Yeah, China, whatever. China. That's right. Dragons or whatever. And they're like the Huns and everything. Anyway, even though it's Disney and in an era that was already kind of going woke, the original Disney Mulan, the animated film, it had this, to be fair, fairly weak woman character. Like, she was not like this pinnacle of strength and like bravery. She was kind of pathetic, and the journey, and you feel it. You feel that she's not as strong as the men. You feel these things, and she ends up having to overcome them with through her own wits and solving. You right. It's like you see the growth occur, and you can identify as the person experiencing the art so much more with this character of this neophyte, this kind of weakling, or just not worldly person, having been thrust into life and having to grab it, right? And seeing her reach that. And even things like Star Wars, right? I actually just was watching was it episode Empire? I just watched Empire Strikes Back the other night because it was May the 4th. My kid has it. I know people are like, oh, Star Wars is lame, but I know we're gonna watch the old Star Wars. Like you gotta,
Yeah.
it's a cultural thing, right?
Yeah.
So we watch Empire Strikes Back, and you see Luke, even though he became kind of like he got cucked
Yeah.
eventually, his character, but you see him do that journey and then fail at the end of the movie. Like Yoda is like, bro, y'all not ready.
Yeah.
Y'all not ready yet. And Obi-Wan's like, bro, you gotta stay in this freaking swamp. You need to grow. And he's like, you know what? I have to do this. I have to try. And he fails and he
Yeah.
gets his hand cut off, right? And he has to live to fight another day, right? He didn't just win right away.
Yeah.
And then what do we see with the modern iterations within our own lifetimes? It's happened. They have replaced the hero's journey with this sort of Mary Sue.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's a woman versus man thing. It's these characters they lack any of the growth that makes these stories iconic, timeless stories so compelling. And you have this modern remake of Mulan, of this character who's born perfect, born with all these magical powers. She has to suppress them because girl power.
Yeah.
And it's just retarded, for a lack of a better word, because now you've separated yourself from the audience in a way that, oh, there's only this one brilliant person born. It's the mythos that they create around the Mozarts, around the Shakespeares, around the Einsteins, that, oh, these are unattainable figures that you, as this lowly human, you could never be that.
Yeah.
You're not the special person, right? That's what they have now done to us in terms of popular media, and music is part of that. But we can see it with the movies. You can see how in the new Star Wars movies, which I haven't even really watched, but they created this Rey character, and she is a Mary Sue, and the Mary Sue is just the perfect character that doesn't really have any flaws, and therefore it's not tangible. It's not something that is compelling, and it will, if you put a bunch of fancy CGI around it, it's going to sell tickets, but it's not going to give a person that growth experience that what this stuff is supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it's happening musically, where a Wagner opera would transport you through an emotional journey, and it wouldn't necessarily be easy, but you'd come away from it with like, wow, I ran a mile. You know what I mean? There would be some sort of emotional,
like a challenge,
a reciprocation, that because Wagner is having a hard time bringing it to you. I guarantee you that. And he's struggling and suffering to bring you these works. And you, I'm not saying you have to suffer, but you need to be stimulated in a way that is not. And again, I think that there is a time and place for elevator music. I think that there's a time and place for it. But when it becomes oversaturated, then you lose the everything else. So with these musical formulas that they have honed in on over the years, we can talk about the infamous 4-chord song. Without, again, getting into the music theory weeds, you have a sequence of specifically and blues is also kind of guilty, and we can kind of get into that a little bit too, of something similar, but, and some of the rock and roll stuff, but in particular, what we would call this 1-5-6-4. And to not turn into a music theory discussion, you are going through a series of chords that essentially use the same 7 white notes if you're in a C major scale. So if you just go do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, anyone can find a C on a piano if you look up how to do it. And you press every single white note until you get to the next C. And you have what's called the C major scale. It's the first one you teach basically every musician on the piano, at least, because it's all white keys, really easy you don't have to worry about any of the black keys. It's just white, 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 white. And it's great. It's a C major scale. But if you want to actually make interesting music, you have to depart from the C major scale, unless you want to like just drone in like one thing forever. But people, I mean, that's a whole different style of music, right? That's just drone music, right? If you want to actually make something interesting, you got to move to D major or F major or F minor, even. That might add something special, right? So a good composer will explore things and take you on a journey, right? That's what switching chords is a journey, because you start with, oh, we're in a nice C major. This sounds like thing. And we're like, wait a second, we just changed to E major?
Yeah.
That's a whole different realm. And it's actually not even closely related to C major, because E major has a G sharp, and that's a black key that is not even included in C major. So we've left our comfort zone of familiarity, and we can even do some more colors in there, right? And so yada yada yada, right? So what they have decided on is a series of chords that never actually leaves the same 7 notes ever. It's just a different combination of them. And it gives you the illusion that you are traveling, but you're not actually traveling.
Yeah.
And even the major and minor chords that are used in this 4-chord sequence are the exact, they're called, in music theory, they're called relative major and minor.
Okay.
Why? Is because they use the exact same notes, and they just have a different one on the bottom. So the quality sounds slightly different, but it's the same pattern. So you have presented, if you just use these chords, an illusion that the person has traveled somewhere, but they actually haven't. It's the fake hero's journey. It's like when what's his face? Leonard Cohen wrote the Hallelujah song, the minor fall and the major lift. These are important, timeless themes that should be included in these stories, right?
Yeah.
But the fake one from today, musically, is the opposite. So, and it becomes more insidious when you realize how many songs use this. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that these songs that use this chord sequence are inherently bad or evil. I got a lot of people push back because they're like, they find out their favorite song uses the sequence. I'm like, you can still have a great relationship with that song, and a lot of them are great, catchy songs. I'll give it to them. But you need to realize that it's been used so much that every time you hear this chord sequence, it's going to, even on a subconscious level, remind you of those other songs, even if it's just one or two. And even if you're not thinking, oh, this is the same chord sequence as this song, it's going to bring you back into that state that you felt when you heard this familiarity, and it gives you the dopamine, it gives you the whatever, that rush. And you can argue that it's just business, and that these songwriters are just trying to make a hit and sell music. So they're useful formulas, right? And yes, a lot of these songwriters are not in some grand global occult conspiracy of music, right? But what it is happening is that the music industry is curating and going for these sounds, and it doesn't have to be that specific 4 chords. I just use that as an example because it's basically a running joke in the industry whenever you have that song. And my kid can hear it whenever she hears it, because I've explained it to her and showed her, and every time one of those songs comes, she said, oh, that's the 4-chord song.
Yeah.
And I just to wrap up my thoughts here, even in the big pop song from the 1600s is a piece, I shouldn't say song, it doesn't have words, a composition. It's called Pachelbel's Canon in D. Right? It's used in like 50% of all weddings, at least, maybe even 60 or 70%. It's a banger, I'll give it that, right? It is similar to the 1-5-6-4 chord progression today that is used in pop songs, but it actually has some more color and some more chords that are in addition to those. In other words, the great big pop hit from 500 years ago, it was kind of that lower common denominator, but it was better and more stimulating by far, because of that extra little bit of journey that it takes you on, than what is happening today. So when I talk about these songs as sort of occult manipulative things, this is what I'm talking about. It's how they're constructed. And sure, you can talk about the degeneracy aspect of it, and the sexual stuff and the violent stuff. But that's a whole nother conversation. And I'm just thinking of it in terms of a music songwriter
Yeah.
perspective. So there you go. There's your history of that. I could talk about this stuff forever. So I appreciate you being interested and asking. And a lot of people shut off when they hear about music and music theory. They're like, oh, I don't know about this. But no, you should. And a lot of people, they can learn. You
Yeah.
can learn this, how to distinguish between something that is quality. And deep down, you know when you hear a song that really speaks to you. And that's not to say you can't enjoy any of these 1, 5, 6, 4, 4 chord type songs. Again, I like a lot of them, but just know that they are not really stimulating you in a way that that art probably could be and
Yeah.
should be.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've noticed it ever since I heard that 4 chord song by them. I've noticed it basically anytime something comes on the radio or it's super popular and I'm like, "Oh, that's just that." I really like that you sort of take it through like the musical approach, because like you said, there is the cultural Marxism part of it as well, and the actual content of like the lyrics and things like that. What's your opinion on like the frequency thing? Because I've heard a lot of people say that they manufacture it in like 440 hertz because it's psychologically doing something to us. What do you know about that?
I wish that I could tell you more. I know a lot of people have done deep dives into it. I am on board with a lot of it. I
Hmm.
think there's merit to a lot of it. Basically, what they're saying is that there's different tuning standards, and some people even blame the Rockefellers.
Hmm.
Um, but the around when the Rockefellers were taking over medicine and
Okay.
turning everything into plastics
Yeah.
away from traditional herbal stuff, right? And this was around 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, they did a similar artificiality to music, and we there's been let's just put it this way: the debate around music and frequency and how we notate music and how we define notes and chords. This has been one that's been raging for thousands of years, going back to Pythagoras' time. Okay,
Hmm.
and it is a whole discussion that I know a little bit about, but I'm certainly not a scholar on. Um, I will say that certainly they have got us on something artificial away from whatever is natural. But I think, like, when you sing, the choirs, we sing, and again, I don't want to make this into a music theory thing, but there's these different, what we call temperaments.
Hmm.
There's what we call equal temperament, and the well temperament that Bach was exploring. They're different tuning systems, and they use different mathematics, right? And one of the reasons why it was kind of difficult for us to figure out the tuning system that we have today on the modern piano with all the 12 white and black keys in an octave, we didn't really have the mathematics systems, or at least it was hidden from the masses. Like, I think maybe older cultures certainly did
Yeah.
have some of this, and we see evidence that there were keyboard type instruments in Rome. So we don't exactly know in a lot of the libraries that might have had a lot of this information as well. But Pythagoras kind of was like, look, we have this great system of tuning that is perfect, and it aligns with the stars, and you can't really mess with it. And it sounded great for certain intervals and harmonies and chords, but it was rather restricting when you tried to explore different chords and different ideas. And we were a kind of, and not to say there wasn't great music from the medieval and other era and in that era, but it was a lot more modal. It wasn't like a Beethoven symphony, right? We didn't really
Yeah.
have the system to figure a lot of this out in terms of notating, right? It was really the Western musical tradition that made that happen. But you're coming from a guy who likes beat up old pianos to play ragtime on. That would be in their own, every single one of those old saloon pianos would have their own tuning system, right? Because it would just be what it was.
Yeah.
And I think this idea of trying to find and tune a piano perfectly, and I think there's something magical when notes that aren't exactly in this perfect tuning combine and they create something new.
Yeah.
And that is what, basically in a nutshell, happened with this moving away from this quote perfect Pythagorean ratios, which sure, that octave sounds great. You got a tone that's vibrating at 440
Hmm.
times per second. You got a string, it's 40, right?
Hmm.
And you got another string that's exactly twice as small. well, that's actually going to vibrate twice as fast. Isn't
Yeah.
that funny, right? How that physics, oh, what a concept.
Yeah.
And so that's going to 880. And what they noticed was, well, the 880 one, it actually sounded really similar to that 440 in terms of you have the bum, and when you did the one that the string that was twice as small, bum, 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 do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. One was lower and one was higher, but there's something about them that sounded similar. Well, it's because they have this cool ratio of one being twice as that sound hitting you twice. And if you want to go back to the beginning of creation, what we have is sound and frequency that instructs all of what we know around us. So there's something about the creations of sounds that is as primordial as it gets, as far as I'm concerned, which I think is part of the reason why music is such this powerful and intangible magical force, basically, because it's something that is beyond us. It connects us to the divine. Not to say that it makes us achieve the divine, but it's our way to communicate with these frequencies. So it's humans' way of answering the cosmos, or God, or however you want to think of things, or this sounds of what is this energy that permeates, right? This higher connecting intelligence. And I think sound and frequency is a big part of that. So we figured out these cool ratios to create cool sound, these beautiful sounds, but then it kind of restricted us in some ways from really exploring our true potential. And that is humanity's, our own weakness. It's the hero's journey. It's our own foibles. It's the hubris of Odysseus or whatever, right? It's our own character flaws. Humanity is a character flaw of the divine. And we can take the divine, that perfect two strings to create this beautiful ratio, and we can tweak it a little bit to make it imperfect and then recreate it with our own human touch. And that's what we did. In fact, it was a really big debate for hundreds of years, mostly with the church at the time. The Catholic Church defaulted to Pythagoras' tuning system for better, at the risk of oversimplification, because there was a lot of push and back and forth between various figures during the time. But this was a debate that raged for hundreds of years throughout, from my knowledge, the 13, 14, 1500s. Where like, can we move away from these perfect ratios of sound? Is that even allowed? Are we going to be smited by God? In fact, certain intervals were considered to be almost satanic, musical intervals. Like, they produced sounds that were so unfamiliar that it was banned. You couldn't do these intervals in a church, for example. Ironically, a lot of those intervals ended up being the foundation of jazz and rock, but that's a whole other conversation. But you found that composers in the time, guys like Palestrina, Gesualdo, Thomas Morley, a lot of these great, Orlando de Lassus, these great Renaissance, this is before Bach's time, they found ways to break the rules of these harmonic structures by doing these forbidden sounds and chords in their choral music that actually followed the rules. Like, it's really incredible stuff. Like, if you go back and look at some of this choral Renaissance music that came from this time, again, before Bach, before Baroque, you'll find almost jazz harmonies in there. It is absolutely wild what they were pushing the boundaries of what human. And if you can imagine being a peasant and all you are exposed to is like pig sounds and, like, you know what I mean? And like maybe carts outside rolling down the street and people dying and people yelling and people shouting, "Watch out below. I'm throwing my poop out the window." Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure that there was more to it, but just your realm of experiences is very narrow. And imagine just being a peasant and walking into a massive Gothic cathedral and hearing these sounds come from a choir exploring harmonies that have never been done before. And this is like 1400, and you're going outside and it's like literally Monty Python, bring out your dead, right? And then you go into this place, and to call it like otherworldly would be an understatement. I think it would be so far out of your realm of understanding. It would be in a religious, but it would be a transformative experience, is what it would be. And really, that's what these early um, uh, composers were doing. They were jump starting the Renaissance. Like, we think of the Renaissance as, oh, it's like statues were really pretty and Michelangelo did a
Yeah.
really cool thing. And yeah, I'm not trying to discount that, but really what was happening is humanity's consciousness was being, after a bit of darkness. I mean, the Dark Ages were not like all dark, but certainly it was this, we were stagnated, and that was by design, right? Like, I think there was high civilizations in the past, and they hid that from us,
Yeah.
and they jealously guarded it. And then the cat kind of got out of the bag during that time. And a lot of this old stuff was rediscovered. And I think the music was a part of that. And so these composers were exploring these things that was expanding consciousness at the time. And a lot of it started, they were starting to break these rules about how we were splitting up these musical scales. Like people wonder why, well, except for maybe a few rare Roman examples of some weird keyboards, we didn't really have a piano or an organ or a harpsichord or keyboard until around Bach's time. It was because we didn't really know how to mathematically split up the scale, or at least there wasn't a single accepted way to do it. And it's not to say that what was decided upon in Western music is the right way. Like, there are limitations to this, and we incorporate that in our music, where sure, on the piano you have a C, and then the black key right above it is a C sharp, right? So you have two choices there, and you can't do anything between. But actually, there's an infinite amount of notes in between a C and C sharp.
Yeah.
Sure, you might change it by a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit, but you can actually play an infinite amount of notes between C and C sharp. So what if you want to play a note that is not quite C, but not quite C sharp? We find that we do need to do that in a lot of classical music, and great classical musicians that have the ability to do that on their instruments. Piano cannot, violin can, where a violin can put his finger on the string and slightly raise it and find those in between notes.
Yeah.
Other musical traditions, like Indian music, also has these microtones in that you have to explore. It's not this C, C sharp, D, D sharp. But to our credit, I say our like I'm claiming all of Western music for my own, but to our credit as someone who has descended from Western Europeans, our system isn't perfect, but it is informed basically all of popular music for the last 500 years. So these guys came up with this system around Bach's time, and Bach was kind of like the guy who really cemented it for posterity, and then of course his progenitors. So a lot of what created the great music that we know today came from us tweaking these perfect ratios. And I don't know if you are familiar with the work. I know this is kind of like a curveball here. The work of a writer named Joseph P. Farrell. Joseph P. Farrell. He wrote a great series of books called The Giza Death Star, where he talks about how the pyramids of Giza are actually, well, they're a power plant, but they're also basically a military complex, and that it can function as essentially, and did function as, a weapon, and that the military interest in that place, like people like Napoleon, when he took over, he sent his troops down to take over Giza and figure out what's going on there, right? There is a military application to these places, right? So Farrell talks about how a lot of these celestial and physics ratios, things like pi, like lots of people have talked about how these mathematics are coded into the pyramids, right? But a lot of them are slightly tweaked, like almost like a harmonic resonator type thing, away from what is quote unquote perfect, like the speed of light, tweaked a little bit. and creating this new type of resonance that is a new type of energy or power, right? And I would say that there's a parallel there to what we did about 500 years ago when we took these perfect celestial, what the church said, oh, you cannot change Pythagoras' perfect, this 440 to 880. That's an octave. You cannot tweak it. But we said, well, what if we do?
Yeah.
And when we did, it ended up making it possible for us to weave in between these different chords. And sure, you might lose some of those perfect, like if a choir sings that octave, they're going to probably sound like they're singing a little more in that perfect Pythagorean ratio, especially a choir from a few hundred years ago.
Yeah.
But we're like, well, actually, we're going to tweak it a little bit. We're going to sacrifice a little bit and cut that 440 to exactly 880 down a bit. And it ends up that you can create this new system that we have on the piano where all these are this equal steps in between all these half steps. And we end up dividing that octave into 12, exactly 12. And the mathematics of it is a little bit tricky, which is, again, why it took us a while to do it.
Yeah.
But what it ended up doing was it sacrificed some of these quote unquote perfect ratios, but it opened the door for Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and Chopin and Wagner to then explore realms that never have really were able to be explored before. And then it exposed us to ideas and colors and journeys that helped, again, raise us.
Yeah.
And like I said, we've been going up and down, and like kind of the classical era kind of took us down the other direction. Then the romantic era really brought us back. And then the modern era we're kind of going back down. And so I think while there is something to be said about this 440 hertz, 432 and all this, whatever, these conspiracy about how they're doing is artificial. But I think that is a more simplified take, not that it isn't incorrect, of a broader conversation of this uniformity that they want. They pick a thing, and sure, the thing they pick maybe isn't what is natural, but I think it's more, it then takes us away from exploring other tuning systems, other ideas, takes us away from, hey, this beat up old piano in this bar, actually, if you explore the right melodies and chords and colors, can sound even cooler and more intellectually stimulating than a Steinway piano tuned perfectly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like there's character there, there's history there, there's something unique that you can find. And it doesn't mean that, oh, if it's out of tune, it's good. It's more that like it's our job is to take this universe, which is this grand, amazing creation, and then to throw it back at the universe with our own twist, our own thing, and not be mirrors, just copying, but be contributors to this grand experience. And I think great art and great music will do that. It doesn't mean you have to reinvent the wheel every time you create, but you should incorporate a little bit of you. And you can lift from other people's ideas, but you should repackage it. And so what they're doing by picking these uniform hertzes and all that stuff is they're trying to make a one size fit all approach. And yeah, we need a tuning system that we all can find the same A together. But this distancing from the hero's journey aspect of the creative process is a big part of why we're losing that. And I think we're gaining it back a little bit, right? I think right now we're in this pushback. So there's my long-winded response to your question without a real answer as to the 440 and that. There's a lot of people that know a lot more. I know some musicians that exclusively try to record in the different hertzes, right? One of my buddies, I don't know if you know, Conspiracy Music Guru. He makes some great music. He makes a lot of NASA fakery kind of content, and which is great and humorous. And look, I'll end with this diatribe with this thought of people like to, as someone who's gone down all the conspiracy paths, it can get a little dark. I'll admit that, right? And sometimes you just need to step back and lighten up about things. And if you're kind of like beating people over the head with NASA's lying and JFK this. They're kind of like, I'm trying to pay my bills here.
Yeah.
Like, shut up. Like, I'm already having a hard day. Not everyone wants to go there all the time, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be a really effective way to sing a song about it instead. And not like an angry song, but a fun, uplifting song. And that's why I feel like I got in trouble during COVID, especially, it was hard for a lot of people for various reasons, but it was hard for someone like me who was so sad because everyone around me was so freaking out. And I was kind of like, stop freaking out. This is not what you think it is. They want you to be afraid, and that's why you're freaking out, because you're scared of fear, right? That's what really is what's happening. And I was just trying to get everyone to lighten up.
Yeah.
And so instead of singing a song like they're trying to kill everybody, that's not gonna make. Instead, I was kind of like, did a little fun, jaunty thing. I'm not going to say too much, right? But I approached the content in a way that made people laugh about it, be more receptive to it. And I got people saying, I don't necessarily. I wrote a song making fun of Fauci, right? And people are like, I don't agree with it, what you're saying here, and I really like Fauci, but I actually I came away from this with a different perspective. I'm not like thinking of it one way. Whereas if I had been ranting on a conspiracy website or a video, that person would have just turned it off immediately. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an icebreaker when people are more receptive to when there's some sort of art involved, right? Because everyone loves to experience creativity and stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel like that realm has been taken over and co-opted, where they have made it seem like, quote unquote, creative types are only one part of the political spectrum, when historically that's actually not been true.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back to, it was pretty based, like a lot of the great artists and writers, and even the songwriters from the turn of the century, like 100 years ago, it was not what you think. And a lot of it was actually traditional family values and cultural identity and stuff that it was celebrated at one point, but has been replaced today. So that's where we are in this cultural battle, this epic cultural battle.
Absolutely. So it's almost seems like the same thing they did with the hero's journey and like movies and media and stuff. They've kind of also done with music, where 440s, like the 4-chord song, is like the Mary Sue character these days.
It is it is exactly right. The 4-chord is Mary Sue.
That's
I
crazy.
like that. I should write a song about that.
That'd be great.
I'll credit you.
4-chord Mary or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. 4-chord Mary. Yeah.
So who do you think are like the most influential people in music that have like started this trend and sort of kept it going? Like, obviously there's probably some specific names, but can you think of like who would have the most to gain from all of this?
You mean the bad guys or the good guys?
The ones that have sort of standardized the 4-chord songs, or like the recyclable pop music and things like that. I know there's a couple of execs in like Universal and Warner Brothers Records and things like that. Are those the people that you think are?
I think so. I think so. But honestly, the who's who of it, I tend to not necessarily go down those rabbit holes. I mean, I'm looking at the bigger picture, but certainly there's something more nefarious going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. You got some shady record execs. Absolutely. There does appear to be a man behind the curtain aspect to this. And, some people are like, oh, it's the Jews. Oh, it's this or that or that. And okay, there are arguments to be made for a lot of this, but I think that there's something else happening here with the monopoly. We're talking about the Rockefellers, how they came in and did this new standard of stuff. There's certainly a lot of it is this more also is a racial division thing, where they want to cut us off from our own cultural heritage by arguing with each other over who did what, or instead of just embracing what we have created as a culture or society, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that, again, it comes from erasing that history. And I think that a lot of these folks are the usual suspects that are doing this across multiple fields. And I think that those, I think a lot of the universal, like a lot of these record execs are really just trying to make money. Like they're
Yeah.
not some evil occultist who's drinking adrenochrome, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just silly, right? I mean, maybe they are, but
Yeah.
for the most part, they're not really. Like the guys, at least the on the surface, are just very astute businessmen.
Hmm.
And they found the formulas. And right now, the popular idiom or the popular zeitgeist right now is this sort of mind-numbing slop that is just recyclable and it's easy. Again, it's people have been bred, especially in the social media era, to want fast and easy. And that's why these songs, these pop songs, they hit you right away. They don't really make you work, and they kind of are competing to become the most vulgar or the most whatever aggressive, and that's usually there. Back in the day, there was a little more subtlety in a lot of this. Like that was the job of a good songwriter would be to throw in an occasional double entendre, right? Like a little line that'd be like, the kids won't know, but the adults be like, oh, I know what you mean,
Yeah.
right? It's like this stuff that can appeal to everybody without being like WAP, like
Yeah.
that song Wet, I don't
Yeah.
even want to say it, right? Like things like that I'm like, when that came out, I have a daughter who's like 7.
Yeah.
I'm like, is this really where we're at, where this type of satire content is shunned, but then this gets put in the front, right? So I don't know, like I think back to how satire used to be so prevalent in society and popular, and even in through the 50s and 60s. One guy I think of in particular is a guy named Tom Lehrer. Are you familiar with Tom Lehrer?
Mm-mm.
He some people know him for like some of his. Did you watch the Animaniacs?
Yes.
The Animaniac. Okay, so all of the musical aspect of the Animaniacs, like United States, Canada, Mexico, Panama, Haiti, Jamaica, Peru, right?
Yep.
This is, and they are explicit. The writers of that show, influenced by the satirical songwriter Tom Lehrer, who did songs like where he sang every element, right? And there's antimony, arsenic, aluminum, selenium, and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen and rhenium. So he would do things like that.
Okay.
But he also had songs like famous one would be Poisoning Pigeons in the Park, right? Where he's like singing about how it's a beautiful spring day and it's this lovely waltz. And then as you start listening, he's singing about how he's giving cyanide pills and murdering a bunch of birds. Like it's this juxtaposition between this lovely, happy melody and these diabolical lyrics.
Yeah.
And it was subversive, but fun. And it was something that kids could also enjoy and adults really could enjoy. Right. And so he obviously didn't come up with this, but he led this kind of movement in the 50s and 60s. And our parents' generation, they loved this kind of stuff. And he kind of got disillusioned through the 60s and then through the 70s by the whole hippie movement, where he did identify with the anti-war side of things, but he also didn't like the aesthetics of the hippie movement and how they kind of got taken over by this free love, drug culture. And he basically distanced himself. Famously, he quit writing satire songs when Henry Kissinger won the Nobel Peace Prize in the 70s, because he said that was the moment that political satire became obsolete, when someone like Kissinger could bomb Cambodia and Laos and then win the Nobel Peace Prize. And of course, we saw that in our own lifetime when Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize for being black. Like that's literally what happened. And meanwhile, he's like bombing people or droning people. And so this whole, I get where he's coming from. I get that desperation of, sometimes I feel like, what's the point of parody and satire when the world is a satirical farce? It makes the satirist almost obsolete when everything is satirical. But then I will come around the next day and be like, you know what? That means our role is important as ever to show the people how farcical the world is, because everything is so satirical and farcical all the time that people have lost their connection with what is actually real,
Yeah.
right? What is actually supposed to be the way. And not say you shouldn't have satire, but there needs to be a sense of normalcy so that you can make fun of that, right? You
Yeah.
need the comedy without the normalcy, you don't have comedy and satire. So that's why I understand Tom Lehrer when he's like, yeah, I don't know, I can't write satire songs anymore when everything is crazy. So this idea of using kind of fun, catchy themes and musical ideas and packaging it with stuff that makes you think is a very powerful tool.
Yeah.
And not to derail or to bring in another topic, but I feel like a similar thing happened in this awesome musical movement that happened when America was really cool, which was pre-Federal Reserve,
Mm-hmm.
pre-World War One. We had a great thing going. Of course, they revise history to say, oh, it was just all racist and it was all bad and everything. It was not. It was not actually. And I mean, there was some issues, obviously. I mean, let's be real. But
Yeah.
for the most part, that was one of the most harmonious times that we had as a culture. And it was one where there was this separation of cultural identities and I'm not saying like, oh, let's go back to segregation, but there was Irish conclaves,
Yeah.
there was Swedish conclaves, we were a melting pot, but it wasn't all homogenized.
Yeah.
It was like we had these centers of cultural vibrancy that were able to maintain their independence, but share with each other artistically and creatively. And that's what Europe was these different cultural identities next to each other that were important to maintain them, but then they shared them musically. And then we saw, Austrian composers like Mozart going and traveling, and he's sharing his ideas with the Polish composers, right? So it was this, again, strong sense of national identity, but this idea of cooperation and collaboration artistically.
Yeah.
And that was what infused and informed so much of what made America great, really,
Yeah.
during this wonderful time, 100 years ago, or more than like 120, 130 years ago. And the music of the time really reflects that. And of course, a lot of people know the term ragtime,
Yeah.
but really it was just this type of music that we came up with first. It was our first American cultural music, where these kind of proto jazz, what we would call ragtime styles, and they were dance music and fun and catchy with fun syncopated bouncy rhythms, but it wasn't the music that what was popular. People think ragtime, oh, they think The Entertainer by Scott Joplin. No, that's not what was popular. What was popular at the time was ragtime songs. I mean, songs are what we, since before language, we've been singing, right?
Yeah.
So it is something that is so fundamental to humans. Music is, but what separates us from the beast is our words.
Yeah.
And this ability for us to combine frequency and words and concepts like that is basically magical ability, is magical, and is uniquely inherent to humans. There are great birds out there that make great songs, but they're not telling a story in a way, and they won't take you on a hero's journey the way that we can.
Yeah.
And it's a mating call. And a lot of music is that for humans too, but we incorporate something of the divine in there that I think is special and unique to humans. So I've derailed myself here, but with this era that we had, we took the hard times that everyone experiences, the stories, the hero's journey, and we started writing songs about it, about life, about going to jail, about losing your honey, about not being able to pay rent. But we combined it with this infectious optimism that was unique to America in the world, and it inspired the rest of the world. And a big part of that inspiration was musical. Like, you can talk about a country having influence, having economic influence. You can talk about a China becoming an economic superpower. But if they lack the cultural influence, they don't have the whole picture.
Yeah.
China isn't infecting the world with Chinese pop music, right?
Yeah.
That has never happened, right? I'm not saying that there isn't good music in China and there aren't great classical, amazing stuff coming out of there. But
Yeah.
what I mean is that America had this moment where we did become this economic powerhouse, but more importantly, we were a cultural phenomenon that it infected the world. And a lot of that was this, and I know this has become a dirty word in at least my world, was this melting pot that we had. But it wasn't that, it was a homogenized melting pot, which is what they're trying to do in Europe by erasing the cultural heritage. They're trying to make it all one. European, they want to erase the histories here. What was so appealing about what was coming out of America was that there were all these elements of the different cultures that all around the world could latch onto and recognize, where there was, especially in the music, this is my area of expertise, there was a strong Irish, Scottish fiddle sound that had been imported from them, and we reinvented as our own, with our own sort of Appalachian kind of white Southerner, like those Hicks types, and they're playing the fiddle out there. And then you would have almost the sea shanty type stuff, this British almost drinking style. Even our national anthem came from a British drinking song, right? That's where we got that, right?
Okay.
And we were combining it with the Western classical music tradition, with these marches and with all this stuff. And composers like John Philip Sousa, who a lot of people might recognize, the Stars and Stripes Forever, a lot of these patriotic songs, marching songs that kids still play today, were written by the American composer John Philip Sousa. And he was taking from, I believe he had Portuguese heritage. I'm not 100% sure on that. Mm-hmm. He was taking from a lot of this sort of Spanish tango. So a lot of these early ragtime stuff has a lot of this Spanish tinge in there, these tango rhythms. And there was a big Italian component with all these Italian operas and stuff. These Italian musicians informed a lot of it, right? And of course, and I'm not going to, because this is the reason I'm talking about this other stuff, because in music history, they're like, oh, it's all black. It's all black musicians that did American music, and black people did all of this, and black people did jazz, and black people did ragtime, and you have as a white person, have no cultural heritage, right? So I get a little flack because I talk about a lot of the white stuff, and people are like, you're being racist and you're denying black people their cultural heritage. And it's actually quite the opposite. Most of my biggest influences musically were black musicians, especially the ones from the 1920s and 30s. But this era was actually predominantly white musicians and composers in the 1800s. Now you could say, oh, it's because, well, the black people didn't get the training and the musical training to compose and write stuff. And a part of that is true, but they were informing this music in other ways, like a lot of the banjo players in the South. And they were coming up with this. And this isn't the blues era. People think, oh, this is blues, bluegrass, that came many, many, many years later. Jazz, post-jazz, right? So this is still something new and fresh, right? So it's frustrating because the fake history will say, oh, all this American music came from black banjo players. And it's like, no, it's not. It came from Western classical music. It's all classical based. Like that's how it's written, is all people that grew up listening and studying Mozart and Beethoven and Bach, right? And they added Irish jigs and Scottish jigs. They added British drinking songs, and they added Italian operas elements, and they added white Appalachian hick Southern music, right? And they added black banjo type plantation, what were called plantation songs that were coming from the Negro communities and some of their spirituals. And it was a new thing. It was the melting pot of music. in that it didn't homogenize in a way that took this element from me. And
Yeah.
I hear it in there, and I'm going to embrace this now. So you saw people in Australia and England and Germany, they were all starting to write these ragtime. It was like a bug that hit people, like it took
Yeah.
over, and it was something unique to America. And it was a great unifying moment in that it unified these cultures, but also maintained their separate their differences. And I will finish this thought by saying that is what I experienced when I spent several years pre-COVID touring the world. I had the pleasure to tour with a pretty well-known band, and what I noticed was we were playing mostly kind of American jazz pop music,
Hmm.
and they loved it. That's why they were here to see the show.
Yeah.
But what I found was that when I then during the concert played a little snippet or a tribute or whatever to the music of that culture, whether or not I am in France playing a little like La Vie en Rose, like classic French song,
Hmm.
or if I'm in uh, uh, Russia, I'll play a little Rachmaninoff or Tchaikovsky, which
Okay.
is they're these people in a world where they are losing sense of their cultural identity by design. These cultural historical figures become almost like a lifeline to
Yeah.
their identities, and these composers are not necessarily gods, but they are looked up to in such a way that these people really need something to hold on to, grasp onto.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite composers is Edvard Grieg. It's a Norwegian composer. A lot of people know him from In the Hall of the Mountain King, right? Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
He's a brilliant composer, and he's a folk hero in Norway. Like you go in the cities and there's statues of him, right? Because
Oh wow.
he's their guy. He's their classical composer that everyone loves and still plays today. And it's like they can say he came from us, and he was. You can listen to Grieg's music, and he has a lot of imagery. I mean, in the Hall of the Mountain King, right? So he's got a lot of like Norse mythology, dwarves and elves and things that are, and they're incorporated in the music, and you can hear these motifs. It's not just in the titles, it's in the music too. And it is something about that time, that era, and and is so Norwegian. It is so special to who they are as a people, and it is reflected in this music. So when I was in Norway, I played some of that Grieg music, and it wasn't like, oh, what I did was so good.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my God, he he knows.
Yeah.
He learned about us, and he's incorporated into him and his identity as an American musician, and he's showing us by sharing this with us. And it shows that our culture is being kept alive, and he's sharing his culture with this American stuff, jazz for better for worse. I had to bit the bolt. I bit the bolt and toured with a pop jazz band. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know, sue me. But it was more about that cultural exchange, which I found was the best, most rewarding part of that. And people in a time where these identities are being taken from them by design, it becomes all the more important to then keep this stuff alive. So yeah, and then I guess I kind of got here with this whole satire stuff, and what was so cool about this American style of music was this relentless optimism of the music is bouncy and keeps you smiling
Hmm.
and your toe tapping, but the lyrics are the hard knock life. It
Yeah.
is just it is rough, and yet we are gonna keep on trucking.
Yeah.
And it was this sort of this fresh perspective that came out of America that really took the world by storm. And it got taken over, I would say, by the jazz era. It happened pretty early on, earlier than people think. And even I would say, and I know I make people mad sometimes, I think the blues is an example of going the opposite direction. I know there's some blues fans out there probably, and I like some blues songs. I think there's a time and place for blues. I do them every once in a while in my sets. But the blues is the opposite, where instead of this weird kind of juxtaposition between different moods between the melody and the music, the blues was low vibrational music and lyrics.
Yeah.
So it kind of just puts you into this feedback state where one song, okay, but if you then just do that for every single one in that same chord sequence that kind of doesn't go anywhere, kind of like what we do today, you are not stimulating anymore. And it then went another way. And then they changed the words where a lot of these hard knock life kind of things, it then just became generic and then even became more sexualized and more like all these old traditional American songs. There is absolutely no sexual content in any of them. It was just not done. And then we saw that change by the 20s, and in the 30s it got really bad. And then we know what happened. There was a world war over a lot of that degeneracy that was becoming just normal. So I'm very taken with this era. This people are like, why do you stop playing just ragtime? And like, yeah, look, I play other styles. Like I only kind of like, I started classical, I played rock and everything, jazz and pop. But there's something about this era, this ragtime era. It's almost like it's my cultural duty because, like I said, Norway has Grieg, Finland has Sibelius, Russia has Tchaikovsky. America, we have great composers, but we tend to sort of step away from this important cultural heritage that we had, and it was this era of songs, these ragtime type songs, that was made us unique, and it was extra unique. And I get pushback from saying this. I have, at least. And it's a little bit dangerous to say, in that it was not a racial thing. It was an American thing. And again, they'll say, oh, black people made ragtime and black people made jazz. No. And in fact, the argument can be made that white people did both of those first. And that's what I get a lot of pushback on. But I'm only saying that because to push back a little harder in the other direction, because it's so one-sided. Like if you check Wikipedia and all these places, it's just lies, 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 lies. And what it is, it's not because it's like a we was Kangs, like, oh, well, kind of situation. It's more of a divisive thing to try to make it about this racial thing as opposed to just we are American. And so I will say, to sort of meet in the middle, that the very first ragtime composers were white and black, which means that it was probably one of the first styles of music that developed not in a homogenized way, at least in such a short period of time. I mean, all Western music came from different cultures and influences and all that stuff. We've done fusion before, but this was a new type of fusion that was fresh. And it became very popular. And again, it was an American phenomenon. And, it's just weird that I grew up and I was interested in these styles. And I had teachers in high school and teachers at university. They were like, this is black people music. Like you can't culturally appropriate this. And I didn't believe that. I mean, I thought it was dumb, but I just believed them when they said it was black people music. And then I started actually really researching. And I found that, no, this was actually American music. And it came from all sorts of different cultures. And they have tried to erase that history. And heck, the first jazz bands were like white Italians. Like it was not what they say. And yes, they took influence from a lot of great black musicians, but they were all working stealing, they're taking ideas, not
Yeah.
stealing, influencing everybody, was this melting pot of a situation. And this kind of racial claiming, that only happened many, many years later. Like that was when everything kind of got woke, and they rewrote a lot of this history to take away that cultural identity from us and turn it into this fighting
Yeah.
racial thing. So my kind of goal is to sort of revisit this and show people that's not the way it was. And just to finish my thought here, I know a lot of people in the ragtime community, and they're 98% white, which is interesting because if it's a Black cultural heritage, then why aren't they keeping their cultural heritage alive, right?
Yeah.
Why aren't they? And there are some great Black ragtime musicians, but it's a very small fraction. Well, it's because it's an American thing, and white people have a very, very strong connection to it because it comes from Ireland, it comes from Italy, it comes from all these European things that we have in our bones, but then it added this uniquely American sound to it.
Yeah.
So the many of the ragtime musicians who are mostly normies, that will secretly admit a lot of this, but will not say it publicly because they don't want to offend, who. And look, I know that there's a lot of racial imagery that certainly would be considered racist today, especially in some of the sheet music covers and some of the terminology used, which I've been having significant trouble in terms of censorship when I'm trying to bring this stuff back and I'm getting these songs censored.
Yeah.
When honestly, put next to rap music today, they are way tamer.
Yeah.
Put next to WAP, they are way tamer, right?
Yeah.
This was an era where humor was a way for the different cultures to have, like, to riff on each other.
Yeah.
And these styles developed as a constant riffing, especially from the two main cultures that were thrust together, for better, for worse. You had the Black and the whites. They were at odds and they had different traditions and stuff. So either you work things out, like if you're in a tribe in caveman times, you either kill your guy next door, or you find common ground. And a lot of that comes through comedy and satire and mockery and making fun of the other guy.
Yeah.
Right. And when you are laughing at each other and insulting each other in a way that is not like violent threats, you can work out a lot of those differences as opposed to taking an axe and then chopping each other up. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So a lot of these songs are written by Black guys making fun of whites and white guys making fun of Blacks, but in a way that is almost even at times deferential to the other side, right? So they're twisting the knife occasionally, but then at the same time they're also giving props, right? They're using these ideas that are coming. The whites love some of the songs they were hearing on the plantations, and so they started writing plantation songs by white composers because there was something foreign that they didn't understand about this world of these Black families living on the prairie, and it was almost exotic to them, right? And the Black people were similarly seeing the different culture, and they were writing songs about it and doing parodies of it, and a style of music form called the cakewalk. And the cakewalk was Black people making fun of, doing parodies of the fancy white American European style dances that they were seeing on the plantations. The Black people were like, you know what? We're going to do our own, and we're going to call them cakewalks. And so they kind of were like the funny little dances, and they tweaked the rhythms a bit. And the white people loved it. They weren't like, oh, this is racist. They started writing cakewalks. And so white people were like, this is great. We love what we're hearing here. And also a style, and I have a hard time even saying it because I know some people that it's so interesting that words are manipulated, like language are spelling, right? That's like for reals, but they have twisted things and to sort of hide this type of our roots, essentially. And a lot of our cultural heritage comes from dealing with our differences through comedy and satire and art, right? And so the a popular term for rural white Americans 200 years ago was coon, because it was
Mhm.
short for raccoon skin, like the Davy Crockett
Yeah.
types. Okay. A lot of people know Turkey and the Straws, like the ice cream truck theme. It was originally called Zip Coon. These were the coon was the frontiersman,
Mhm.
and it was associated a lot with the sort of Appalachian white hick personality. It developed and became a term for Whigs, which was an early, actually anti-Masonic political party. Was the first big alternate political party, third party in America was the anti-Masonic party,
Mhm.
and they were called coons. Okay,
Hmm.
and so there was a lot of these coon songs were developed then, and over time that word became repurposed around the Civil War to refer to Black Americans. But, and this is what's the kicker, it was almost never derogatory. It was just a term that was used, and these songs were called, for the most part, were called coon songs.
Mhm.
And it was, a lot of them were just like lullabies, song being on the prairie, living on the prairie. Again, traditional family values. But of course,
Yeah.
that term has now been reinvented to be this, oh, this is this racial slur and all that. So essentially, 50 plus years of popular music has been erased from memory because they were called this, but even though they were not racist. So
Yeah.
just to sort of finish this back and forth, you saw Black people and white people writing coon songs and these cakewalks, and this developed into ragtime eventually. And what it was just a series of racial kind of riffing back and forth, and it basically, America's first music style was born in satire, parody, and comedy, and this type of riffing. And it can be sometimes a little, a little offensive here and there, but a lot of the times it's just beautiful and touching on themes. I mean,
Yeah.
we all are humans. We're tribal beings. We're tribal, and we have our own connections to our own cultures and tribes. This goes back millions of years
Yeah.
or whatever. And being able to explore these ideas artistically is so much healthier than just murdering each other all the time. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a time and place for war, but dealing with these concepts in art and music is huge. And it's so interesting that every basically musician today will look at these songs from this era, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and will refuse to touch them because they think it's all racist,
Yeah.
when it's actually was the opposite. It was, these were the mechanism, and honestly, I could write it. I could write a dissertation on this. Like, this was the mechanism, for better or for worse, that brought the sides together. And it was this way that actually, I wouldn't say it ended racism, but it made, by discussing these things and singing about these things, it made the conversation a little less tense.
Yeah.
And it brought the sides together where you had Blacks and whites. And of course, this ties into the whole minstrelsy thing. And I get, a lot of people are like, oh, blackface and all that nonsense. And sure, and that was a part of it. But it was like the whites that were doing the blackface, there was the comedic mocking aspect of it, but there also was a deferential aspect to it. And it was like almost like this sort of the simplicity of this prairie life kind of thing. And like it was almost like it was they were enamored by it.
Mhm.
And Black people, it was like they saw that, and I'm not speaking for them as a whole. I'm talking about the songwriters that I'm familiar with, and they liked that. They were like, white people are seeing something in our culture and they're really liking it, and they are turning it into memes and pop movements.
Yeah.
And so they embraced it, and Black people were putting on blackface and they were doing that whole stuff. So it was, and again, a lot of it, when we look at this modern lens, even I'm like, oh, that's a little bit far, like that song or whatever, or
Yeah.
those lyrics, or that picture of the blacks with the watermelon or whatever. But it was not that was a small percentage of what was actually going on. And it was this sort of cultural collaboration, again, that was like, we can find common ground here, but also maintain our different heritages and our different styles of what we do. And you can't combine art music artistically if you don't already have something different to be. In other words, if everything is homogenized, if everything's the same,
Yeah.
then you can't have a clash of cultures. And musically is the best way. The healthiest way, artistically, creatively, is the best way for humanity to work out those differences. And they took that from us. They really did. They took that from us. So, wow, there's your American music history lesson from a quote racist point of view.
I really think that, like, I'm seeing a lot of the parallels, you know, with today and like the last 10, 15 years, where they've sort of removed the ability for us to joke with each other. You know, just in jest, and instead now we have to take everything seriously. And if somebody says something that's against your group, now you have to like hate that person instead of being able to I guess sort of like collaborate together, you know, like let's join each other in laughing at ourselves together versus, you know, focusing on what makes us different.
It's the South Park mentality. Like,
yeah.
Not to keep going back to them because they kind of got lame over the years, but in the 90s, it was this idea of everyone equal offense, right? Everyone should be able to be made fun of equally. There shouldn't be, if you give one single group immunity from comedy and mocking, even, then actual psychopaths will assume the identity of that group to get away with atrocities. We've seen that happen again and again throughout history, right? Where it's like, oh, you can't make fun of them, and then some person comes to like, okay, I'm one of them, and then I can do whatever I want now because this is a protected class. So this idea of a protected class, it doesn't make sense. And you know, people are like, oh, you just hate this group if you are writing songs about trans individuals, right? Making fun of them. And it's like, well, no, I'm writing songs making fun of trans individuals because you told me I'm not allowed to.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like if there was no taboo there, if there was no protected class status, then I wouldn't really care, right? So it's like, I'm going for what you say I'm not allowed to question. Of course, it is then becomes my obligation as a human, but as an artist especially, to then do that. And I remember when you know, during the crazy COVID times, and then the George Floyd thing, and then I remember Dave Chappelle did a special, and he did a couple jokes about a couple trans jokes, right? And for the most part, like the trans community was like, we don't care. Like, this is fine. This is funny. It's just the few very angry vocal minority that came out and they were trying to kill, like basically destroy him. And I'm like, wait a second. You should be able, Dave Chappelle should be able to make a couple jokes. And so I remember I wrote a song called "You Will Never Be a Woman," based off of that story, and it really blew up. And at first, I was surprised, mostly because I had a dead YouTube channel, and this was right before they banned me. But what I was surprised at was how many people came in and were like, "I'm trans," or like, they're basically, we don't like how we're not allowed, we are becoming special. In other words, like, because the song wasn't even that bad, right? And there were some people who are like, "You're so transphobe," because they saw the title, "You'll Never Be a Woman." They're like, "You're a transphobe." Blah, blah, blah. It was more that like, I'm teasing them in a way where I was not like super mean spirited about it, but in a way where, you know, you look silly dressing up like a dude or vice versa, right? Like, I'm trying to just make them face the reality of the situation, right? And that it's okay to laugh at yourself, and it's okay, and all these things. And so I had trans people being like in the comments on YouTube, I actually thought this was funny. Like, I should be allowed to laugh at myself as long as you're not calling for violence. You know what I mean? Like, there should be we should be allowed to do this stuff. And, you know, it wasn't like that for everybody, but I was surprised at that. And of course, you know, YouTube came and deleted all those videos. But I feel like people we're being discouraged from exploring some of it it's okay to be offended. I mean, being offended isn't really a real thing. Like, if that makes sense, it's sort of just your own choice
It's
to be
yeah, I was gonna
offended.
say it's a choice.
It's a choice. And so, you know, even recently I've been reviving some of these songs, these ragtime era songs, and some people would find the titles or whatever, the words offensive. But again, in the context of the time, this was not, it wasn't thought of that way. And it was more just like, this is something that everyone can enjoy and laugh at together. And it might be at the expense of a racial stereotype or two,
Yeah.
but we are, we have stereotypes
Yeah.
and we should be allowed to make fun of them.
Yeah.
Um, and so anyway, I feel like that is what has been taken from us in a big way, especially in the last few years with the woke cancel culture and Me Too movement, and then the Black Lives Matter, and then the COVID era, and all these things about making fun of someone like making fun of Fauci. I should be able to write a song making fun of Fauci without having to lose 16 years of my work.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, it's like when I even think of like my friends, like people that are actually really my friends, like I make fun of them all the time. That's like that's part of our like dichotomy between each other. Our dynamic is being able to joke around and riff on each other like that.
And yourself. I mean, I call
Yeah.
myself a piano fag all the time. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
That's fine.
But I am, right? And like that's okay. Like to be, I'm a music nerd,
Yeah.
right? And I'm kind of retarded about a lot of things. And these words, there shouldn't be tab. I'm a Scrabble guy, right?
Yeah.
So I love words. I like playing word games. And the idea that a word, again, it's the context. That's right. So
Yeah.
the word by itself isn't inherently bad. And so that's why this whole big foofara around this Shiloh person and the N word and all that. I'm like, hey, look it. I'm actually learning songs right now that are using these words in context that you would never imagine. They
Yeah.
are endearing. They're singing lullabies, for God's sakes, and the music is gorgeous. Like, this is not what you think. Like, intent is huge. So,
Yeah.
a few years ago in Scrabble, they went woke. Just like a lot of these institutions, right?
Yeah.
And they decided that we need to actually ban hundreds of words that could offend people. And I'm like, look, if FAG is my best play, I need to play that word because I'm not trying to insult you. I'm trying to win the game. Right. I'm trying to play the best scoring word. And then if you say that I can't play that word because it's offensive, I'm like, I'm not playing Scrabble to make a political statement.
Right.
I'm playing because I'm competitive and I want to win.
Yeah.
And that to win means you have to know more words than your opponent and be smarter, essentially. And I like that challenge, right? So I need to learn as many words as I can. And I don't care if it is a racial slur or not, because I'm not calling you a racial slur. So they ended up removing hundreds of words, and it infuriated a lot of people. And of course, other people were like, yes, we need to be safe for the future of our children. But this is how they manipulate language. And it bites them in the ass eventually, because it then creates a vacuum around these words and it makes them almost like it breathes new life into them. So I remember when that happened and they removed all these hundreds of words, I had to, as a competitive Scrabble player, I then had to learn because I needed to know what I wasn't allowed to play anymore. Does that make sense? Right. So they forced me to learn hundreds of racial slurs. Are you following?
Yeah.
Like, by the fact that they removed them, I then had to be like, okay, I need to learn all these words because I can't use them anymore. So then I had to learn what they all were. And I ended up learning way more racial slurs than I ever would have even been exposed to, because they had to remove anything. And a lot of these even weren't even slurs. They were just like descriptive terms. It's just, they went so far, right? They're like, we need to remove the N word. And everyone's like, okay, fine, I guess you can do that. And then they're like, we're going to move this and this and this and this and this. And then we're like, oh, no, stop. That's what it is. When you give these people an inch, they will inevitably take that mile. Right. And so I ended up learning all these curse words, and now they're like legendary. Like everyone knows these words you can't play in Scrabble anymore. And the same thing is that they did with the term coon, where the term was originally for white people, and then it became a music style. Coon
Yeah.
songs were extremely popular and written by people all over the world because they loved this new American style that was black and white and all these different cultures, right? Like I said, um, and then they memory hold that word, and an entire genre of music, and as a result, 100 years later, it's actually made it so easy for me to find this stuff because that term coon has been so removed from our vocabulary that now all I need to do is just literally look up that word or look
Yeah.
up the N word on these libraries and other digital places. And all of a sudden, it's like 10,000 coon songs show up. Why? Well, it's
Yeah.
because it's the only, it has been erased that we essentially cut ourselves off from it and you can't access it anymore. Well, the mere making that word verboten has now breathed fresh life in it and allowed me to then have access and bring it back. Just like they removed all these curse or racial words or anything that I would have, they're old and obsolete even. And
Yeah.
then now kind of in the joke in the Scrabble community, people are like, use these words again, because by censoring them, you actually made us being like, wait a second. And it's true now for this sort of digital renaissance where like they push too hard, where I was sort of in this limbo for 15 years on YouTube with this suppressed channel. And they were keeping me in this position of like slight growth, but mostly stagnation to
Yeah.
sort of ease me along. And I never would have gone anywhere, to be honest. It wasn't until they killed my channel that then everyone is, it took a little time, but then everyone's kind of like, wait a second, right? So
Yeah.
when they ban you, it used to you just be banned and you'd be screwed, right?
Yeah.
Where it's no longer like that. Where I'm like, guys, I'm getting kicked off of Bandcamp and I'm getting all this stuff, and then everyone's like, wait a second, you're getting kicked off of YouTube and Bandcamp. Like, I actually want to listen to that. I want to know why. Like,
Yeah.
I want to know. So it's backfiring in a big way that the more that the harder that, and then I think COVID was the turning point where
Yeah.
people, it was hard to convince them that there was this sort of conglomerate effort of this collaborative effort of crazy censor and censorship. And now it's like easier to explain that it doesn't have to be a group of people in a dark room smoking cigars, but it's this big tech. It's the whole thing. There's sure there's like occult societies that are influencing a lot of this and different governments and all that. Yes. But it is became more tangible and in real life when people lost all, they weren't able to go to church and all these things were taken away from them. And now people are pushing back. And I don't think we've won, but I think that we are in a far better place than we were like 5 years ago. That's for dang sure.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the Streisand effect, to bring it back to the South Park thing, is very real.
Yeah, remember that Mecha Streisand was like the early one. Mecha Streisand.
Yeah, that was great. So that actually you went on to partially answer one of my next questions that I had, but I was going to ask about like your work on, you know, late 19th century, early 20th century ragtime stuff, but I guess
I pretty much covered it. Pretty much covered it there. Yeah. I would just stress that it is something that's very quintessentially American, and just like all these cultures, they are holding on dearly to their great composers. We should hold on dearly to this moment and that we had to offer, and includes Black musicians like Scott Joplin, who a lot of people know for the Maple Leaf Rag and the Entertainer, but he was not very well known during his time. He didn't really write songs. What were popular were these songs of this era, and there's again something so infectiously optimistic about them, but also real and like gritty and just real life stuff. And that is again what makes us special as Americans. And I think so. People are like, why do you play so much ragtime? Again, it is more that this is our America. People are like, oh, America's jazz and all that. It's like, no. That came way, way, way later. And there was something that we offered first that was unique and special to us. So I think it's my duty to keep it alive. And like I said, the more that I've delved into it, the more that I found that I identify with the culture and the race of a lot of these early. And look, I played this music happily for 20 years thinking that I was appropriating Black people's music, right? That's what I was taught. And I didn't care because I liked it. Is that, if that makes sense? And so now that I am older and wiser and I'm actually doing the research, I'm finding that they have hidden a lot of this history. And I found just earlier this year, I found that the first ragtime song composer was a guy named Ben Harney, who was a white American, and he did more to popularize ragtime than any other living person, but he was removed from the history books because he was white. And so a lot of this stuff is an injustice, and I'm not saying it's a conspiracy from Black people. I think that this is a divide and conquer by other folks that are, and I'm not trying to point to one demographic either. I think this is just the same powers that be that want to take away the human agency from us and homogenize everything and make us have all these infighting instead of embracing our unique heritage. And our heritage does come from this racial tension, animosity, differences, struggles between these two cultures, Black and white, that were thrust together, and we had to make do with it. And our music was our way to hash out a lot of our differences. And today it might seem unseemly, but I feel like we need to go back to that, and we need to go back to being able to joke and make fun of each other. And this whole like, oh, Black people own this word and you can't say it. That is the type of, I'm not trying to offend people or whatever, but that is a type of racial elitism almost. That there's like, oh, we're better because, or you used to do this to us, so you can't. I'm like, come on, guys. Like right now, we are in the now, and we have all have something to offer. And like I said, some of my biggest musical influences are Black, but a lot of them are white too. I mean, again, this identity, or I cannot do this, I can't say this, I can't sing this, I can't play this because I'm not this type of person. That's not the way it should be. Artistically, sure, I'm not going to like change my skin to Black and then what I mean, but like what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the best of what I see from your culture. Like when I was in Russia, I'm going to share my culture and I'm going to show you what I learned from your culture. So I'm like, I'm going to learn some Scott Joplin, and I'm going to show this was a great Black ragtime American musician, and I'm going to play some Ben Harney and say this was a great white American ragtime musician, but you know what? They were just great American musicians that were the great minds of their time, and we shouldn't be talking about this in terms of divisive racial histories. We should be talking, it should be a more unified thing that acknowledges the differences, but that we have this collaborative effort. So I feel like we really, I got to, like, this is, I could talk for this forever. This is my bread and butter right now. I am going through these university collections by searching for racist terms, which is hilarious. It now actually has opened up this whole world of music that is existing only in sheet music form. Was never recorded. Not every song is brilliant, but they're unique in that they weren't written to be massive hits. They were just like Joe Schmoes who had the access to typesetting for music, for sheet music for the first time that could get published. We had the technology to do that, right? We didn't have a way to record it, but we had to, and this music on the page is like a communication to the future, where a recording is like, oh, that's a nice recording. The music is like, you're giving a gift to say, you can create this, something that I offered in my time, but repackage it. And you're like, a good musician isn't just, who's like learning a classical piece, isn't just trying to do exactly what Bach or Beethoven wanted. They are interpreting it and adding their own personality to it. Sure, don't make up completely like nonsense if you want to do a good job, but this music is there for us, and it is like ripe for the picking. So I am going through, and I have over 2,000 songs now from 1830 to 1930-ish, about 100 years all in digital form. And it's some of the most wonderful, like I really just needed it. And in this time, I'm like, I'm at like my midlife crisis over here, and I'm like trying to figure out what to do, and I'm having a hard time with my career. And then I was getting a little bit that Tom Lehrer fatigue
Hmm.
of the Henry Kissinger winning the Nobel Prize. Like at a Peace Prize, at a certain point, I'm like, I'm I can't just do satire stuff. I need to step back from this a little, right?
Yeah.
And then I found all this stuff, and I'm like realizing how much of it is there, and how a lot of the people in the ragtime scene, they love these songs, but they're afraid to play them
Yeah.
because they're afraid of losing their careers. And it's wild because, again, a lot of these, there's nothing bad in the lyrics. It's just some of the imagery and some of the terms. Yeah, the name coon songs for a lot of these, the style is a big one that turns people off immediately. So there's this sense of shame. There's a sense of shame, and it comes from Black people, and it comes from white people too. And they're ashamed of this era. And I'm trying to say that you shouldn't be ashamed. We shouldn't bring back the worst parts of that era, but we should bring back this strong sense of identity, this ability to laugh at each other, to make fun of each other, riff on this diss track, this idea of diss tracks. Like we've been
Yeah.
doing this for thousands of years. Like these things were not unique to America, right? Like flighting was this old type of
Yep.
yeah, of riffing and this, all this stuff goes back so long. And Gilbert and Sullivan were writing these patter songs, which is basically like rap from today, right? So we've been exploring this stuff for a long time, and they've been trying to divide us by saying, "Oh, belongs to this race," and it's like, no, 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 it's a cultural thing, and
Yeah.
America, yada yada yada. So, yeah, it's kind of like a new mission I feel like I have where I've already been canceled, so I'm not really worried about getting canceled by anyone anymore. And I'm gonna sing these songs and show that they were funny and beautiful and offensive, but also just like that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's okay.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's weird that, people are often more hesitant to like crack a joke than a politician is to like drop a bomb. And I think that's like a huge, way to show like where we are, where people are afraid to make fun of each other, but they'll kill each other in a heartbeat.
It is crazy, right? And then if you look at some of the violence and some of the music,
Yeah.
in rap music or whatnot. And I hate to sound like a boomer, really like rap music these days, but I don't know. Like I tend, and there's some violent stuff happen in some of these ragtime songs, but certainly it's in a way like he's he stole my baby. I'm gonna cut that guy. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
stuff that we all feel as
Yeah.
humans, right? Like if we lose a love, we want to, I don't know, I get angry, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it, instead of killing someone, you can sing about it, right?
Yeah.
And then that's less, you know what I mean? Like it's a way to get out your frustrations and stuff it's a more healthy outlet
Yeah.
for these eternal emotions that we all have, and suppressing them and being afraid of, you're going to have psychological effects on you as an individual, but also as a culture where we now, it's this, everyone's afraid. And I feel like we're at this moment with this Shiloh person, for better or for worse. It's this catalyst of people are like, we cannot live in fear all the time anymore, especially in this where everything's connected and everyone's always on camera. And every time, like sometimes we have moments where we get mad.
Yeah.
And there was a time when we would be mad, and maybe some people that saw you would be like, oh, that person has a temper issue. It was never a case where then the entire world knows about your bad day in 24 hours. That has
Yeah.
never happened in human history before. And this has opened a can of worms in a lot of ways. And, and I shouldn't be one to complain. If I'm going to go on video and put my face and sing offensive things, I shouldn't complain if I'm going to get fired for it, right? Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm allowed to complain, right? I think that's stupid, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, this idea that someone just living their life and then making a misstep or something that could ruin them forever, I think people are over that,
Yeah.
and in a big way. And I think that we should. It's going to take a while, but the importance of offending people is, look, I, as a musician, as an artist, want to make people happy. I really do. I don't want to make people, I want to challenge people, but I don't want to make people hate me. That's not my goal, right?
Yeah.
And for many years, I tried to write music for normies. I wanted to write beautiful music that people would love and respond to and enjoy. And I don't necessarily like losing friends over some of the songs that I've done, which I have.
Yeah.
I've lost some, you know, the trust, and I've lost the respect of family members, things like that. That's not my goal. However, I feel like I sort of felt like it was needed, right? I feel like there was that song, "You Will Never Be a Woman," that I wrote after the
Yeah.
Dave Chappelle thing. I'm like, I don't really care that much about the trans issue, to be honest. Like, I honestly wasn't really even on my radar. But I'm like, I feel like they're getting too much power. So I need to push back at them, right? And if I lose some followers and lose some fans and lose some friends, I guess that's a sacrifice that I'm willing to make. That's really how it feels like. And so I want to make people happy, but I feel like we need to also learn to get offended.
Yeah.
And I might push that a little too far sometimes, but I tend to think that it's important, and words and intent is a big one, right?
Yeah.
And like, I'll just wrap up this thought with a great song that I covered and adapted and updated by Monty Python. There's another type of humor that used to be, you could do kind of the type of racial body humor, right?
Yeah.
They have a song called "Never Be Rude to an Arab," which I think is written by Terry Jones.
Okay.
And basically the whole song, "Never Be Rude to an Arab," is like, never be rude to a Dago and a Wop, and never be rude. Like, it basically, it's like, don't be rude. And then it just calls them every racial slur that you can think of, right?
Okay.
It's like, don't be rude to
Yeah.
N-words, right? You know what I mean? Like, so the point is, it's trying to take away the power that those words wield, right? By showing he's not calling people, he's saying, don't be rude to Wops and Dagos, right?
Yeah.
You know, like, that's funny. Don't be rude to Beaners,
Yeah.
right? Like, the whole idea is it's the intent behind it, right? I'm not saying that you can't call someone a racial slur and mean it, but this idea of, well, these words are now removed from the lexicon, and as if racism never existed in humanity, like, that's just retarded, right?
Yeah.
So I added to their song, and I basically added verses, and I added a lot of those the words that Scrabble taught me by removing them, like bog trotter. A bog trotter is a racial slur for Irish people that I'd never heard of.
Oh, wow.
Bog trotter. Yeah. I'm like, bog trotter, that's such a great word.
Yeah.
Like, I never would have even known that was a slur for Irish people if Scrabble hadn't removed it as being a slur. So I'm like, don't be mean to the bog trotters, like things like that. It's like, these words, again, it's the intent.
Yeah.
And I should be able to play bog trotter and Scrabble without the nation of Ireland with their pitchforks showing up my door the next day, right?
Yeah.
And like, look, you guys are a bunch of bog trotters. Get over it. Like, embrace your bog trotterism, and that's where, like, with the racism and terms like coon, and how they've been twisted to be this awful thing, and that all white people are bad and racist and yada yada yada. And like, that's not the way it's not the way it was, and not the way it should be.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. Now I do kind of want to shift topics a little bit, if you're okay
Sure.
with that.
Yeah.
So
and I have about like 30 minutes as well too. So I don't know if you want to get to some questions, or I have about 30 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the two biggest ones that I'm thinking of are you just described our this like last week or so that we had as the season of occult sacrifice. Now I know we saw the Pope we saw the Pope die during that.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about this season and like describe some of the events that have taken place in like previous years?
Sure. Yeah. This is my bread and butter, really. Like,
All right.
other than ragtime and racist history, racist musical history, and harmonies and Pythagoras. I tend to. You have to be careful when you're talking about and dissecting a lot of this stuff, not to give these people too much credit. And look, And when I say, I know people are like, who do you mean by these people? And I'm like, look, I don't really care about getting into that conversation because obviously there's no really one answer there. It's these bloodlines. Let's just put it that way. I like to
Yeah.
call them Babylonian bloodlines for better lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But they're inbred retards,
Yeah.
also for a lack of a better term, right? And they have some good ideas, and mostly they have pretty bad ideas. And I get that humans are kind of dumb and we're not really ready for a lot of information. And sure, fine, keep some of it from us. Well, yada yada yada. Anyway, there is a lot of hidden history to things. I don't need to tell you that, but listening to people like William Cooper talking about all these his secret societies, and a lot of what they do is ritualistic, and a lot of it involves sort of broadcasting their ritual so that it's like almost this karmic thing that they have to do so that they, I don't know, don't get punished karmically. Look, you don't have to believe in magic to acknowledge and recognize that they do, or at
Yeah.
least that they go. It's a method of communication almost, right? Like a good example I can think of is COVID, in that in the first few months, the number 33 was ubiquitous in headlines. It was like 1 in 33 chance of this, 33 million going to be dead. 33-year-old gets COVID, and there are 33 cases in Finland, 33 here and here. And now some might push back and say, oh, well, there was a lot of headlines and stuff. Well, no, in the very beginning, it was completely not balanced. It was so insane. So a lot of that is a communication. They brought,
Hmm.
these are things that there is a way to broadcast, is a way for them to be like, oh, this is an op, or this is an occult ritual, right? So these dates and numbers are chosen for lots of reasons, and some might be astrological or whatever, but a lot of it is communication type thing, where it's like a way for them to see to communicate with each other that this is an occult undertaking. And dates are a big part of that. Like they'll choose, the like the groundbreaking at the Pentagon was September 11th,
Yeah.
was on 9/11, and it was 60 years, exactly 60. And there's another
Yeah.
major occult
6.
number that
Yep.
you're right. So it was 60 years to the day was when so these things are planned for a long for a long time. And the groundbreaking for the Twin Towers was on a Freemasonic day. I think it was August 5th. Yada yada yada, right? So these is a communication type thing. So it's not necessarily that they have this magical effect, but they try to create it by doing these cycles and stuff. So, and I'm not one who claims to be an expert on especially the historical aspect of it, but a lot of it goes back to biblical times, and some of the traditions and rituals that happen around then, and a lot of it goes back to some of the pagan stuff. So, in particular, this time of year, we see a lot of these the
Hmm.
Valpurgis night, and the Beltane festival that occurs in Europe and England, Scotland, all these places. These are seasonal, again, pagan. These go back the change of the seasons. We have these things, right? So they have repackaged a lot of these traditions
Hmm.
with their modern sort of occultist take on a lot of them for the modern time, I guess, for better or for worse. And I, I guess they get their sick pleasure, I think, out of it for a lot of the time. But a lot of it is this like they're trying to steer humanity for whatever purpose it is. I don't know if they want the New World Order or whatever it is they want. It's something stupid like that. But so there is purpose to a lot of it, but a lot of it is also just sort of almost autopilot, I feel like, at this point. Not to take away from their agency of it, but um so the season the spring season, right? Heck, this reminds me of Igor Stravinsky, Russian composer, who wrote this piece called Rite of Spring, which
Hmm.
was this really intense sort of pagan ritual type thing. And I think when they debuted it, people were so shocked by the sounds they were hearing that they even rioted, right?
Oh
So
wow.
this idea of, and like I mentioned, when these peasants in medieval times going and hearing this quote, when you're exposed to something you're not really familiar with, it does things to your brain that are hard to predict,
Yeah.
right? And so that's why it can be wielded again, like this sort of mob mentality thing is real and it can be manipulated. And so a lot of these events are more like magical manipulation of people through emotions and trauma, where like 9/11, it got a lot of people into this vulnerable trauma induced state, right? A lot of these boomers who grew up and kind of like nothing big had happened like that since Kennedy, really,
Yeah.
and so they were thrust into the state, and it made them extremely open to suggestion, right? Extremely malleable in that moment. And then what did we get? The Patriot Act and war, and weapons of mass. So everyone was sort of in this state of frenzy. And again, we saw that during COVID in a big way, right?
Yeah.
It's this manipulation of, and so a lot of these times when they recycle dates for these events, it's more like they're broadcasting like this is another one of those manipulative experiences for maybe karmic purposes, but also just like communication to other societies that are like, oh, this is a yada yada event. Like we need to be looking into this, right? Because there's not like some network where they're all on a app like communicating, right?
Like
This is they communicate through, there's no group chat for like occultists, right? They communicate through rituals and headlines and numbers and dates and events and stuff. So we do see these types of sacrificial things happen in certain times of years, certain dates. And it doesn't always follow exactly, but it happens enough where you're like, well, as a pattern person, you're like, no, this is for real, right?
Yeah.
And you can look at the founding of America as a big one of those, in that the Bavarian Illuminati was formed May 1st, 1776, and they're like, yeah, let's create essentially a new world order by overthrowing all the world's country or the governments, right?
Yeah.
And what we see was the first state, Rhode Island, declared independence 3 days later. I think it was May 4th, 1776. So it's like maybe they weren't on a group chat back then, but the timing of all that is like, wait a second, right? So, and then you saw the French Revolution, right? And so that's a whole can of worms, right? So even you would have the shot heard around the world. The start of, was it Lexington conquered, the beginning of the Revolutionary War, I believe was April 19th. And that's one of the dates that we have as an important one in the occult calendar. Now, did they decide on it then, or was that something from before? I'm not sure, but it certainly ties in with this long running plan of how they set up America as this vehicle for their new world order. Essentially, that's what kind of America was. So, hate to say it, that's what it was founded as, at least. And we're still living through that right now, really. This battle that's happening between kind of the nationalistic versus the globalists, right?
Yeah.
But certainly they like to recycle these dates, and it goes across cultures. I think the Nazi Warsaw Ghetto, the Walpurgis Night, or was it not Walpurgis? Night of the Long Knives, I think was also on that date, or like when they burned a bunch of Jews in 1942 in the Warsaw Ghetto was also April 19th. But yeah, we saw when these events really started to right when in the 90s, when you had Bill Cooper trying to warn people about, he's like, look, they're coming for the Second Amendment. He wrote Behold the Pale Horse. And he's like, yeah, they're going to stage a bunch of school shootings and this is before Columbine and all that stuff. So he was warning about all this. And then what did we see? Events like Waco, events like Ruby Ridge. And people started to notice that these were happening on dates that were like, wait a second, like the fire burning at Waco of all those children was on April 19th. And then again, a few years later, they blew up the Oklahoma the city building, right, on April 19th. These are the same dates. And at a certain point, you'd be like, wait a second. And then you see Columbine happening on April 20th. And that was like literally what Bill Cooper was warning against. There would be some sort of weird staged shooting event. And then a lot of these are connected with fire rituals, because the pagan, the Beltane and these Walpurgis Night, it ends with this sort of May Day May Day, there's that
Yep.
Illuminati thing. Again, this is all tied, right? Celebration of burning, of a ritual purging, a ritual burning, right? And sometimes it can be a wicker man, or like the wooden man, right? It's like this effigy that is burned, and it's like a burning of this. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just like it's a sacrifice that you have to make to the whatever, the demons, the gods, or whatnot. And so a lot of these mythical boogeymen get removed at this time as almost like a ritual. So that's why we see Hitler dying on May 1st, which was part of this sacrifice ritual. And that's why we saw Bin Laden was also removed on May 1st, though they say it was May 2nd now, but it was initially reported on as May. It is more important what is reported than what actually happens, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. So I like to talk about the planes on 9/11 as having specific numbers chosen for that ritual, right? This actually goes back to the occultist magician, dark magician, Aleister Crowley from the turn of the century. I'm sure you're familiar with Aleister Crowley.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So a lot of those numbers that were in the use on the flights of that 9/11, and even the floors that they supposedly hit, were all part of a Crowleyan ritual incantation. And I have the receipts to back that up. And some people might push back and say, you mean that they flew exactly into the thing? Or they say, oh, I thought there was supposed to be no planes. It doesn't matter what actually happened, as weird as that sounds. What matters is what is now reported in the public consciousness. What matters is I go to Wikipedia and I see Flight 93 did this, and I see Flight 77 hit this, right? So these are numbers that they are doing on purpose for communicating, right? The Pentagon being 77 feet tall with 7 stories located on the 77th meridian, right? And then there was the Doomsday plane, Flight Venus 77, flying above it when it hit. And Bush Sr. was 77 years old, and he was the one that announced the New World Order exactly 11 years before that date in 1990 on September 11th, when he gave that famous New World Order speech. And that was on September 11th, 11 years before. So all these things are planned out, and people are like, how can they be there? And again, I also don't want to give them power by saying that they're all powerful, all knowing, and they can create these out of time rituals, because they mess up. They're fallible. They're human. They get away with a lot, but only because we let them. And part of it starts with just having these conversations. And so I started getting into this stuff and noticing these things. And so I remember in 2013, I'm like, are they going to do a fire sacrifice ritual this year? And the next day, the Boston bombing happened, right? And that was, again, April 15th. And it is this time of mid-April to May 1st, this 2 weeks time, where they like to do these type of rituals that involve sacrifice, especially through fire, right? We saw Abraham Lincoln murdered on April 15th by the banksters, right? There's a conspiracy there. And I'm not saying that Lincoln was some savior and great guy, but he was removed. Let's put it that way. And then we saw the Titanic sinking on April 15th. Okay. And of course, now there's some that have connected that to the Federal Reserve. So what date did they choose for tax day by the 1950s? April 15th, right? So these are things that they do on purpose as kind of they're mocking us, but also it's like important for this ritual aspect that they have, right? To do. And then we saw the Notre Dame fire from years ago was April 15th, right? The Deepwater Horizon explosion, April 20th. These are all these key dates that happen. And of course, this year I was like, we need to look out for a major sacrifice around April 20th. And although he is reported to have passed on the 21st, it was actually the 20th. And again, it doesn't, and people, because the Pope, right? And people are like, you were one day off. You said it was supposed to happen on the 20th. I'm like, look, there's a window here, and they arrange these events to have this impact, right? And The other day that has the number that has sacrificial connotations going back to the Bible is 25.
Hmm.
And I've seen that used in a lot of headlines when it comes to sacrifice, especially fire sacrifice. It's 25. And then we saw Virginia Jeffrey, or however you pronounce her name, the Epstein person, she died on the 25th, allegedly, right? So a lot of these are, I'm like, I don't know if the Pope, I mean, some people think the Pope has been dead for a long time, right? And that was a whole thing, right? Well, I don't, what matters is what they say for the
Yeah.
ritual, right? And so and then of course, we got all these fires in Israel on May 1st, right? For
Hmm.
that's where that's supposed to be this great big fire sacrifice, or all these things. They tend to happen in clusters. And it doesn't mean that every single event is an occult, whatever. But if it is at your own peril that you completely discount and deny the occult aspect of of certain major events, like the Wacos, like the Oklahoma cities, and like the 9/11s, which are more about magical. It's tough because, and I'll even say the taboo sh word, like Sandy Hook,
Yeah.
where people are like, well, look, that was, it was about gun laws and stuff,
Yeah.
or they'll say, why didn't they get rid of, if it was about guns, then why do you still have your gun, all this stuff. These are secondary. The main reason for events like that, and I'll be careful about how I talk about the sh, the taboo sh, but the reason around these events are more psychological and magical, in that it created something. And we see, whether you or not you like him, Alex Jones became this sort of fall guy,
Yeah.
scapegoat for independent thinking, right? It made that if you question any event, you must be an Alex Jones type conspiracy theorist, Sandy Hook denier.
Yeah.
When it's normal to ask questions and to say, well, this isn't consistent, or there's a discrepancy here, where now, I mean, especially in the rapid era of just everything gets memory hold. I mean, think about the Vegas shooting. It was the most deadly mass shooting that we've ever had in America. And it got memory hold so fast,
Oh yeah.
especially compared to something like Sandy Hook, which they're still beating,
Yeah.
right? These events, sometimes they don't go the way that is planned, or even if they do, then they have to sort of reinvent or repackage them for whatever purpose, right? But the idea is these are magical, psychological trauma type events, which are by their very nature occult, esoteric, or whatever the term you want to call it, that are meant to steer consciousness. And 9/11 would, of course, would be the biggest one of our lives. But I would say Sandy Hook is up there as well. And again, it's like, you have to be able to have nuance here. You should be able to question these things without being like, oh, no, there were no planes or no one died, right? You can express those opinions and explore them. And you should be able to, in other words, without the boot of the legal and all that stuff. Like, as long as you're not calling for violence or calling for trying to do anything illegal, they want to terrify people from using independent thought. And so these events are used as essentially catalysts to attack that, right? So Sandy Hook would be, if I were to arrange something like that event like that, I would say something like gun control would be at the very low end of things. Something a little bit higher than that would be perhaps to create this notion that any random, slightly neurodivergent, I hate that term, like spectrum-y kid could be the next school shooter.
Yeah.
You better get him on in psych classes. You better get him on these psych drugs. You better drug them up and make them take away their individuality, right? So
Yeah.
I would say that would be way more of a motive for an event like that.
Hmm.
But certainly even higher than that would be just to traumatize and terrorize the population, but also make them afraid to question authority.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's a cult ritual to cement their own control over us. So that's why you have to walk this line as a conspiracy theorist analyzer, to not give them too much power and credit, being like, they run the world and they're doing all this stuff and they manipulate everything. Well, it's like, if they truly did, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation right
Yeah.
now, right? So no, they don't. And their grasp may be far more tenuous and weak than they let off. And sure, they can pull off some of these major events and they'll try to destroy you for questioning them, but then that's almost like they're they're trying so hard. It's like, what are you trying to prove? Or do you not actually have as much control over things? Why do you have to keep doing this?
Yeah.
We are more powerful than they think. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I completely agree. Like I see 33 basically everywhere. Anytime I see it, I'm like, oh, they're sacrificing somebody. Um, and I think even like, you were talking about like the April 20th date. I'm pretty sure that's when the WEF like had Klaus Schwab step down. So even like,
Oh, that's it. Yep. You
Yeah.
are right. He was another sort of they announced it
Yeah.
on because he'd been talking about it for a few months, right?
Yeah.
It's about when they announce these things. Then you kind of like, oh, so
Yeah.
this is a ritual type event, right?
Yeah.
And it was normies. I get it. They look at you like you're crazy when you start talking about this stuff, right? And they're just like, and even when the Pope thing happened, I'm like, guys, I told you that there was going to be a major sacrifice.
Yeah.
On like I gave you a 2-day window, and it hit it, and everyone's just like, nah, you're just crazy. These just and yeah, things happen. I'm not trying to say everything you have. It's that line we walk between pattern recognizer and full-on schizophrenic, right?
Yeah.
It's that you have to be careful, and it's fun. I like that. I like that tightrope walk, right? It's not for everybody, right? Because you can move, but I feel like adding an artistic, creative aspect to it is a more grounding, safer. Is that if that makes sense, right? Like it helps me grounded in reality if I'm singing about whether or not I'm just like ranting on a forum, right? I'm like, at least it's like a little more tangible, and I can package it. And that's right. That's like how you can reach people about a lot of this stuff is singing about it with a little catchy tune and a wry smile,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think back to like all your songs that I've heard, like the one about Rabbi Shmuley. I think actually you've done more than one on him at this point, right?
No, I might have mentioned him in another song, but I've only done one on. He only gets one. Yeah. I almost didn't want to give that to him. It's like, cause like I didn't want to immortalize him in song.
Yeah.
But like I said, like sometimes this clown world is so clownish that I only have to just stick a mirror up to it and reflect it back at it. And it's almost like it's too easy. Like Shmuley, like I almost didn't want to write the song because it's so easy. He's just begging to be parodied, right? And I'm like, almost like, do I want to even acknowledge him by doing it? But at a certain point, it's like, yeah, you got to do it sometimes. You have to. So, and what you were saying about these numbers and everything, the 33s, and I feel like it's people, I sometimes try to like make my songs like 3 minutes and 33 seconds. And they're like, are you an occultist? Like, what are you doing? Are you Illuminati? Are you Mason? I'm like, actually, no. I like to do it because it's fun, but also just you're taking their tools and using it back at them. Right. And, I don't know if I'm not really a gamer, but I'm interested in culture. And so I look into kind of this stuff. And so like, there's a really big game right now that just came out recently called, get this right, Claire Obscura Expedition 33. Have you heard of it? Yeah. So it's blowing up right now. It's independent studio. They didn't follow the norms of the big studios, and it's a huge hit, right? Like I'm just seeing all people raving about it. It only costs $50, which is gone the opposite direction from the other guys, right? Why am I mentioning it? The first thing I noticed is because it's called Expedition 33, right? So immediately I'm like, huh? So I'm drawn to it. And then I'm seeing that it's not a type of thing that is like a soul-sucking, money-grabbing, degenerate type of thing. It's people reporting this is a great story. I'm not trying to sell this game. I haven't played or anything, but my point is that just because you see these numbers, it doesn't make them inherently evil, right? That just like the 4 chord song, the
Yeah.
chords by themselves aren't evil. It's a lot of it's the intention, right?
Yeah.
And so here you have a great game that is using this number 33, which is usually associated with occult, often nefarious activity, and it is doing it in a refreshing and in a way that now that number is associated with human agency, right? This is not a, people are excited because it's like, wow, this is a smaller company. This is not a big, they're actually, this been a monopoly, right? And they're like, we're going to use 33 in our song. So like, I will use 33 in my song lengths or whatever. It's because I'm like, these numbers aren't, these occult symbols are not inherently bad. It's how you choose to wield them. And music is the same way, where some chord sequences I would say are easy. They're manipulative. And I'm like, if I want to manipulate someone, I guess I can use that, but I'd rather like make it a little more interesting. But sometimes it's okay to use these. It's okay to put 1, 5, 6, 4, those 4 chord song in one of your songs, but maybe don't write your entire catalog that way, right?
Yeah.
Like try to like use their tools against them.
Yeah.
And I'll just finish this thought by saying AI, I feel the same way, where I'm very concerned about it in a lot of areas, but then also I'm seeing my kid creating songs and being inspired to actually write lyrics, because now she doesn't have 30 years of songwriting experience. That's not saying she wouldn't want to learn, but like sometimes we need a little boost in this, a creative boost in a world where we're constantly flooded and inundated with things. And it's like, can be hard. And even me, it's to sit down and just write, so sometimes a tool like AI, which is being used to create weaponized music and art and stuff against us and going to be replacing us, it can also be repurposed with the right intent, to fight back against them. So like, I'm not going to say never create music with AI. I think that's because then that's going to relinquish that tool to them.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to have a monopoly anymore. We need to use all the tools that we have. I'm going to still come up with my own lyrics and come up with my own tunes. But heck, I mean, I do parodies all the time where I'll lift someone else's melody and I'll just add lyrics. Like, I feel like this sort of collaborative effort, and we've lost that.
Yeah.
And we're so worried of being derivative or being sued or being canceled or whatever, that actual creativity becomes stifled. And I think AI can actually help that, as long as it's doesn't become a crutch, essentially.
Yeah. And that's sort of where I like have to struggle sometimes, is because, with the vast amount of information there is like to research, and then trying to keep up with all of it, and there's 1,000 different things that come out every day. It's like, well, do I use it in a way that sort of benefits what I'm trying to do, or is me using it what they want me to do?
What they want. Yeah. No, and you have to be careful, because then I don't want to act like I'm like championing their work, be like, hey, look at, they're arranging all these things on these days because they're so adept and amazing and clever. And it's like, you have to be careful, and then you have to be careful not to fall into those rabbit holes and the traps and the psyops. I mean, it's endless, right? And I see someone in the Rebel chat saying is Shiloh an op, and it's like, a lot of these things could be ops, but like, it's what we make of it, right?
Yeah.
If we then take it and then use that then against them, and I feel like it doesn't matter if everything's an op, and then nothing's an op. Everything's clown, everything's satire, and nothing's satire. It's like these terms are now losing their meaning. And everything just is, right? And we just need to just go with it and not get completely discombobulated and flustered and disheartened and pessimistic. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be real. You shouldn't, or I'm not saying you should put on the rose tinted glasses. However, it is tough. I hear you. We're being inundated. It is exhausting, the social media blitz that we're exposed to. And it even as a creative type, when you used to write a song and it could be a hit, or make a video and it would last for a couple of weeks. Now it's like you have 12 hours of half-life on that before people just move on. And as a content creator, it's it's exhausting, and I
Yeah.
don't blame people for burning out. And like you saying, and then like they're getting inundated with all this, and it be hard for people too when you're like, look, I found this connection, then they
Yeah.
shut off, and they don't have the benefit of 30 years of rabbit holes and Alex Jones listening that a lot of us do, right? And
Yeah.
that's why sometimes it's just package it in a catchy little 2-minute ditty, a little bit of red pill here, a little bit of humor here. Uh, that could actually be way better than a 30-minute video or writing an online dissertation on a forum.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's why they really have been coming for the artist types, like me, So
Yeah.
here we are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know I have a lot more questions for you, but I think we might have to save them for a part two because I know you're coming up
Yeah,
on
I would
time.
love that, because I know I did spend a lot of time sort of yammering, but I'd like to have a little bit more of a back and forth with you to talk about some of your interests and stuff. But yeah, I don't know if we even have time. I mean, I have maybe like less than 10 minutes before I got to get going. So
Okay.
I don't know if there's any questions or anything from Chad, or if you want to just sort of add a couple things or.
Well, I thought that I would say, like, is there any interesting conspiracies or concepts or anything that maybe you want to put on people's radar? Maybe something you haven't talked about a lot or recently?
Um, I just want, I guess anything that like people find that are ridiculous, I feel like should be revisited. Um, I know that a lot of the space content really can turn people off because they're beholden to a certain view. And I know that, even things like flat earth is a big issue for a lot of people. And it's one that I'm not really like that big on or interested in. But I've been interested in sort of the space element of like questioning that for a while. And I like the idea of questioning that, and not that you should believe one thing or another. I like the idea of a bigger Earth, and that doesn't necessarily mean flat or round, really, at all. If that makes sense, it's
Yeah.
just like this unexplored lands. I don't believe them when it comes to most everything. It doesn't mean that you throw reality out. That's why you have to be careful, like the
Yeah.
discernment, right? You can't quit. But like, they've been lying about gravity. I think that folks like who have the Teslas, obviously, but lesser known guys. One in particular by the name of Thomas Townsend who was an American inventor, and he discovered stuff like what we would call electrogravitics today, which is this sort of coupling between gravity and electricity, right? And it can create a propulsion of basically it's UFO tech, right? Is what we're
Yeah.
talking about here, and it has to do with the idea that gravity, it can be manipulated on a local scale and is not just this Einsteinian bending of space time that only very large objects, like this whole physics notion that we have, is woefully obsolete,
Yeah.
and antiquated, and it is so missing, right? And so a lot of this stuff was openly being explored in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and even through the 50s, but they went hardcore black around the 50s and 60s. So
Yeah.
I think this idea, we have this everyone thinks, we have gravity and all this stuff figured out. We had that figured out for a long time. It's like, no. There's actually two different civilizations. The term that I think I would throw around a lot would be breakaway civilization. There exists a breakaway civilization that is operating with two main different things from us. One, economics. They have a separate financial system from us. Occasionally, those worlds collide. And I've done some research on that in what are known as the bearer bonds scandals, which we will have to
Mhm.
save for another time.
All right.
But there is this a parallel system of finance that they have. The other one is physics. They are using a parallel system of physics. So they have two different systems, and they are more open. Whereas we are taught of this closed system, this closed economic system, where actually the universe doesn't work that way. There
Yeah.
is this unlimited sense of openness that we can tap into, and they have us stuck in this old way, right? So this breakaway civilization is a big one, and a murkier third one would be, where are they? Are they on Mars? Are they beyond the ice wall where like the Nazis went,
Yeah.
right? Where there's right. Are they just living here and they're just living in here, right? And they're just operating, right? So there's that whole questions, right? So I think that we need to be open to the idea that these things exist. And then the other main one would be, I would say the rabbit hole would be sort of this, what I would call the parasite theory of human development. Are you familiar with that? So basically that there is an invasive intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be careful not to call it aliens, because that is I think that term is so loaded.
Yeah.
I would say something that is non-native to this realm, that I feel like came here and steered our development.
Okay.
And again, I know this sounds like Ancient Aliens. I don't think of it that way. Especially if you think of that we're on a bigger system. It could be just our neighbors, literally from next door, right?
Yeah.
I think that there is a invasive parasitic intelligence, for lack of a better term, that may have helped us evolutionarily.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the serpent Eve apple allegory, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The tree of knowledge.
Yeah.
And in exchange, there was a worm in that apple.
Okay.
There was a parasite in that apple, and that it is a something that is, it's tough because people are like, oh, talk about toxoplasmosis and all this stuff, and that's a whole thing. So I think this is a little more metaphysical than in like a worm in your brain, which may be true, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there could be, right? But I think there's something more metaphysical here, and there's a hive mind type parasitic entity that is steering the course of events in a negative way for humanity, and a lot of the elite are way more beholden to this parasitic entity, to the point of it basically taking them over. And it creates degenerative behavior in humans, particularly sexually, in terms of how it spreads fecally. So it's kind of like, the degenerative stuff in that realm, I would say. And just because it is a good way for it to spread, but also through pedophilia. So I think that pedophilia is the main cause of that, is this, because that is how this type of parasite, it can take over hosts when they're young.
Yeah.
Sadly. And so some of these maybe rituals, I'm not going to name any names, but for example, like biting the genitalia of a baby in a blood ritual when they're born would seem to be more like a way to pass on a parasite to a baby, that is than anything. And that vaccination is another big way that happens. So a lot of these things that we think are actually help us are actually, a lot of the toxic waste actually feeds these types of radiation, radioactivity. These parasites love it, and more nukes the better, right? Yep. So they cause this type of behavior in humans that is, and I'm not to say that we don't have our own violence and that is inherently human, right?
Yeah.
But this is something more, is something sinister, and it turns us in a way. And I'm just trying to conceptualize it in a way that I understand. And I think the term parasite is a good way to think of it. And an invasive one is another one. And so a lot of the inbreeding with these elites, quote unquote elites, is connected to that. So I feel like those are big ones. Okay. Ones I don't tend to talk a lot about, just because they're a little intense and a little negative. But I love the idea of a bigger Earth. I think that is really intriguing to me. I think that there's something there.
Absolutely. And I think regarding the like parasite one, you have a song called Worms in Your Brain, don't you?
No, it's called The Parasite Pill.
The Parasite, that's it.
The Parasite Pill, the melody is there's worms in your butts and they're driving people nuts. Yeah. And what's funny is my kid likes, every once in a while she goes, there are worms in your butts and they're driving people nuts. So like, yeah. And it's like, you talk to someone about this and they're just like, what? That's dark and weird. What are you talking about? But if there are worms in your butts, and then people are like, oh, actually, okay. All right, I'll entertain it. So there's something to be said about packaging these intense ideas in catchy, bouncy rhythms, just like the ragtime. Like
Yeah.
we've come full circle to ragtime, right? Singing about hard life, but you know what? We're doing it with a smile, and that's why I'm sitting there and smiling in front of the camera, singing about clown world. You know,
Yeah.
I'm trying to be real, but I'm not trying to make people like depressed. I'm trying to make people laugh, but also face the reality of it. So
Yeah.
on that note, I think we're going to have to call it.
All
But
right.
we went like basically like 3 hours. So
Yeah.
this was a great thing. So
Absolutely. And Foundring, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk to me. Would love to set up episode 2 because I have to ask you about things like Ruth Payne
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
and things like that. So anytime that you're down to come back, maybe in a few weeks or so, we can do a part 2.
Speaking of demons, oh sorry, no, I didn't say that. Don't sue me, Ruth.
Do you want to let people know where they can find you and find your work and your music and everything like that?
Sure. Yeah. I got banned off of YouTube, so I moved onto Rumble, and I'm on BitChute, and I'm on Odyssey. So I'm foundering on all of those. So just look me up on there. I did on Odyssey. I actually backed up all of my old YouTube videos.
Nice.
So that is a great resource. So all my old stuff going back to 2005 is on there.
Awesome.
I got banned off of Bandcamp, so I had to move to Gumroad. So Gumroad is another thing, a place where you can sell music. So I'm foundring.gumroad.com, though they have been giving me grief about some of my content lately. I just released a sort of compilation best of album called Speed of Science. I actually just released it yesterday. Just various songs of my satire songs. So that you can get that. They initially blocked the sales of it when I released it yesterday, and I had to appeal. But it's right now, knock on wood, it's still available. So you can get that album. I'd really appreciate that to support my work. And then I'm on X as Foundring1. So that's kind of like my biggest audience I have is on X right now since I got banned off of YouTube. So
Nice.
if you're interested in hearing some of these songs, these ragtime songs, go check it out. They're on Rumble. Some of them have bad words, so I tend to do clean versions too, right? I'm not trying to alienate people. I'm trying to make it so that kids can hear some of them and be inspired by them and not have every other word be coon or something, right? Like, so I'm doing the originals and I'm doing clean versions too, right? I'm trying to, so go check them out. They're really funny and they're really cool and they're really fun. So yeah.
Nice. Foundring everywhere. Go check out his music. He's got amazing posts and loves to make people laugh. I think your music's great. I've been a huge fan the entire time since I first found you, and you continue to just keep going and releasing these songs and stuff, and I'm a huge fan.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Well, I appreciate your work too. So I look forward to talking more about the nitty gritty conspiracy stuff at some point. So it's a date.
You got it. All right. Well, thank you everybody who joined us in chat, and we'll probably do questions next time directly from chat, kind of get like the AMA and stuff like that. And thank you again, Foundring, for joining me, and I hope everyone has an awesome rest of your night.